Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I was sitting on the back porch late one Saturday morning, sipping coffee and scrolling on my phone when I noticed something off in the backyard. At first, I thought maybe I was just seeing things, but the grass near the fence was definitely different. It looked burnt, like a patch about the size of a car tire, maybe bigger, except it wasn't a random scorch. It was shaped like a perfect spiral. I got up and walked closer, half expecting to find some kids had messed around and set something on fire overnight. But the edges were clean, no singed leaves or burnt debris anywhere else, just that spiral patch. The grass was brown and dry in that exact shape, and the center was even more faded, almost bleached out. I ran my fingers over it, and the ground underneath felt hard, almost like it had been pressed down or compacted. The weirdest part was how perfect the spiral was. I've seen crop circles on TV and stuff, and this wasn't exactly the same scale, but the shape was unnervingly exact. No stray marks, no footprints, no signs of anything other than that one strange design. I live in a small town, and my backyard backs up to a stretch of empty fields. Nothing fancy, no farms or anything, just wild grass and trees. And I live with my parents, who were out at a farmer's market early that morning. Nobody else was home overnight except me and my cat, and I didn't hear a thing. Usually, if something like a fire or loud noise happens, I would have noticed. Windows rattling, sirens, neighbors talking about it. But the whole night was calm, quiet, and normal as far as I could tell. I checked my phone for any weird notifications or local news alerts about fires or accidents. Nothing. The weather app showed a clear, calm night with no wind or storms. Curious, I took some pictures with my phone and sent them to a couple friends, thinking maybe someone would joke about it or have an explanation. One friend asked if I'd been drinking or if it was some kind of prank. I wasn't joking around, but honestly, I didn't have an answer. I went inside to grab a flashlight and a notebook, wanting to document the whole thing in case it got stranger. When I looked out the window again, the spiral patch caught the sunlight just right, and I noticed something else. The grass right outside the spiral was unusually green, almost glowing compared to the burnt patch. That struck me as odd, like the spiral was draining the life out of the grass in one area while everything around it seemed extra vibrant. I spent the rest of the morning poking around the yard, trying to find anything unusual nearby. No strange smells, no holes, no weird debris, just that spiral. My cat wouldn't come near it either, which was odd because she's usually curious about everything. Later, I thought I might ask my parents if they'd seen anything strange when they got back. When they came home, I showed them the patch. My mom was quiet for a bit, and my dad said maybe it was some chemical spill or something. We don't keep anything like that outside, though, and the neighbors hadn't reported any spills or accidents. That evening, I went back out with a measuring tape. The spiral was about 12 feet across. I paced the distance a few times, and it felt like it had to have been made by something or someone who knew what they were doing. No way it was random. The sun was setting, and the light made the spiral look even more strange. The contrast between the burnt grass and the healthy green around it was almost glowing. I sat down next to the edge and just stared, feeling kind of unsettled. That's when I noticed the first sound. It was faint, a low vibration like distant thunder or an engine idling far away. I looked around, but the street was quiet. No cars, no trucks, no planes. I put my ear to the ground near the spiral, and the vibration seemed stronger, but it didn't feel like it was coming from the earth exactly. More like the air around the patch was humming. I tried to shake it off and went inside to make dinner, but the sounds stayed with me, faint in the background. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing what I thought was the humming, soft and steady, and the whole house felt colder than usual, even though the heater was on. Around 3 a.m., I woke up and saw a faint light flickering through the curtains. I figured it was a car or someone walking by with a phone flashlight. When I looked out the window, the street was empty, dark except for a few stars. The light wasn't from the street or a neighbor's house. It was coming from the backyard, a pale glow near the spiral patch. I rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe it was just a reflection or my imagination. I pulled on some shoes and stepped outside. The air was still, the grass quiet beneath my feet. The spiral patch looked different in the moonlight. Less burnt, more like a dull gray, but the glow wasn't there anymore. No sound, no light, just the usual night noises. I checked my phone for the time, 3:07 a.m. I stood there for a while, staring at the patch, feeling the quiet settle in again. Then, I noticed the stars overhead. For a moment, the sky seemed clearer than usual, like I could see every speck of light. That's when I caught movement out of the corner of my eye, a flicker of something between the trees at the edge of the yard. I blinked and looked again, but it was gone. I shook my head and went back inside. The next day, I showed the spiral to a neighbor who's lived here for years. He shrugged, said he'd never seen anything like it, and that maybe it was just some weird natural thing, though he looked uneasy when I asked. I kept checking the patch every day, but it didn't grow back or change much. The grass stayed dead, and the healthy green around it seemed to stay the same. Sometimes, when I sat near it, I thought I could feel a slight static in the air, like the hairs on the back of my neck standing up for no reason. I never figured out what made that spiral or why. No one else heard or saw anything. It just appeared overnight, perfectly formed, out of nowhere. I still don't know what to make of it. It was late September when I found it. I was on my way home from a service call out past the quarry. Some guy had his truck die on a logging road, and I was driving back through the old forestry cut-through. Not many people use that road anymore, especially not at night. It's rough and narrow and barely marked, but it saves me 20 minutes getting back to town. It was around 8:30 p.m., already full dark. I remember because I just turned my headlights to high beam when I came around that bend near the creek and saw the car. It was a dark blue Nissan sedan, older model, parked on the shoulder at a weird angle. Not wrecked, but not like someone meant to park there either. The engine was still running. That's the first thing that struck me. I slowed down and rolled to a stop behind it. Driver's door was wide open. I sat there for a second with my hand hovering over the shifter. There were no hazard lights, no sign of another car, no one waving me down. Just this idling Nissan, sitting half on the grass, half on the gravel, like whoever was driving it had meant to stop, gotten out, and walked off into the trees. I left my truck running and got out with a flashlight, shined it in the open door first, empty. No purse, no phone, no keys in the ignition either, which made no sense because the engine was still going. The dome light inside was on, and the radio was playing static. I said hello a few times, stepped back and angled the light toward the woods, but there was nothing. No movement, no sound. I couldn't even hear the crickets. The air smelled weird. Not like gas or oil, more like warm plastic. Burnt, but faint. That's when I noticed the windshield. From a distance, it just looked dirty, but up close, I don't even know how to explain it right. It looked warped, like the glass had been softened and then hardened again in waves. You couldn't see through it properly. The surface had these smooth, melted-looking ripples, especially on the driver's side, like it had been exposed to extreme heat, but hadn't cracked. I ran my fingers along it. It wasn't sticky or hot, just misshapen, like it had been molded. There was no damage anywhere else on the car, no dents. Tires looked fine. Paint wasn't scorched. Hood wasn't even warm. Just that warped windshield and the faint smell in the air. I checked the back seat. Nothing. Glove box. Empty. The registration was in the door pocket. Car belonged to someone from 2 towns over, a young woman by the name. I thought about calling it in, but there's no reception out there. I figured I'd tow it back into town and let the sheriff handle it. So I went to my truck to get the hitch rig. As I walked back around the front of the Nissan, my flashlight hit the ground by the shoulder, and I saw the marks. There were impressions in the gravel, deep ones, spaced out evenly like footsteps, but too far apart. Not boot prints, not tires. More like, I don't know. You ever seen when a crane puts a stabilizer foot down in dirt? Kind of like that. Big, roundish, maybe a foot and a half across, four of them leading from the road into the trees. The pattern was strange too, not in a straight line, not side by side, offset. I stood there for a good minute just looking at them. Then I looked up at the woods. It was dead quiet. Not just normal quiet. No insects, no breeze, no leaves rustling, nothing. That's when I noticed something else. The static on the radio inside the car, it had stopped. The engine was still running, but the radio had gone silent. No sound at all, not even the usual hum. I leaned into the driver's seat to turn it off and realized the power button wasn't even lit anymore. Like, the whole console had gone dead. The headlights were still on, but nothing else inside was working. I shut off the engine manually, just held the brake and moved the shifter into park, then hit the kill switch near the fuse panel. It was a jerry-rigged setup. This wasn't a stock ignition, and I realized then this car had been modified. The wiring under the dash was messy. Someone had definitely done some custom work. For what? I couldn't tell. As soon as the engine died, the silence got heavier somehow, like I was underwater. I started hearing something in my own ears, not outside. A high-pitched ringing, faint but steady, like tinnitus, but not coming from inside my head exactly. It made my eyes feel weird, like pressure behind them. I backed away from the car and looked up. Nothing in the sky. No moon, no stars, just a low haze like thin clouds had rolled in. I hadn't seen them earlier. Then the truck headlights flickered. Just for a second. Blinked off and back on. Engine still running fine. I looked back at the Nissan, then at the woods, then walked quickly back to my truck and got in. I sat there a second with the engine idling, debating whether to tow the car or leave it. Eventually, I decided I'd come back in the morning with the sheriff. I put the truck in drive and eased around the Nissan, heading back toward the main road. About half a mile later, I saw another mark. Right in the middle of the road, a circle, maybe 5 feet across, like the gravel had been pressed down and smoothed. The edges were crisp, and the gravel inside looked almost polished, like it had melted and settled again. No skid marks, no sign of tires, just that one perfect circle. I didn't stop. I drove straight back into town. The next morning, I came back with the sheriff and his deputy. The car was gone. No tire marks, no signs of towing. The impressions in the gravel were gone too. Like the whole shoulder had been raked smooth. We walked the woods where I'd seen the weird spacing in the ground. Nothing. Just wet leaves and branches. No broken limbs. No sign anyone had been out there. I described everything I'd seen, showed them where it had been. The sheriff asked if I'd been drinking. I hadn't. I don't do that when I'm driving the service truck. He said maybe someone had come back and moved the car in the night. I asked, why leave the engine running and the door open like that? He just shrugged. I haven't driven that road since. I know people joke about weird stuff in the woods, but I've worked around here my whole life. I've pulled wrecks out of ravines, hauled cars with bullet holes in them, even had a black bear walk up on me while changing a tire once. Nothing ever made the hair on my arms stand up the way that car did. I still don't know how the windshield melted like that without touching anything else. I don't know why the engine stayed running with no key. And I don't know what made those marks in the gravel. But whatever it wasn't gone when I left. It started 2 nights into a road trip I took last year. I was driving from Northern California down to Flagstaff, planning to cut through Nevada on the back roads. I like avoiding the highways when I can. I sleep in the car sometimes or find little motels depending on how tired I am. I'd done this kind of trip before, nothing unusual. The first night I slept in the car off a turnout outside Tonopah. It was fine, quiet, cold, but I had a sleeping bag and those Reflectix covers for the windows. Woke up early, made coffee on my camp stove, and got moving again. Nothing strange. That second night, I was aiming for a cheap motel near Ash Springs. I was on a stretch of road I'd never driven before, one of those 2-lane highways with no towns for miles. Around 10 p.m., I started feeling drowsy and pulled off onto a wide gravel patch off the side of the road. No lights around, not even passing cars. I cracked the window, killed the engine, and sat for a bit in the dark. That's when I first noticed it. The radio made a soft clicking sound. Just one, like a relay switching. I hadn't touched it. The car was off. At first, I thought it was the plastic in the dash contracting from the cold, but then the speakers crackled like static for a second or two, just enough that I noticed. I turned the key to accessory, thinking maybe something hadn't shut down right. The radio came on by itself, which was weird, but not impossible. Some newer cars do that. Mine's a 2012 Subaru, though. Manual everything. The screen lit up, but there was no station showing. Just a blank bar and the volume number, 3. Then it made this low, garbled noise. Almost like a voice, but distorted. Not music. Not static either, more like a tape being played backwards. It faded in and out. I tried turning the knob to switch it off, but the power button didn't respond. I even tried changing stations, and the dial on the screen moved, but no matter what I set it to, the sound didn't change. Then very clearly I heard my name. Not shouted, not spooky, just spoken, mixed into the distortion like someone saying it through a broken intercom. I froze. I remember looking around like someone might be standing nearby, but there was nothing, just desert. I turned the key all the way to off. The lights shut off, the screen went black, but the sound kept going, just barely, so faint I had to lean forward to hear it. My name again. Then some other words I couldn't make out. Then a kind of garbled clicking sound. Then silence. I sat there for maybe a full minute, trying to decide if I should start the car back up or just leave it off. I even opened the door to make sure I wasn't picking up interference from something outside. My phone had no signal. Nothing else made noise. The night was completely still. Eventually, I started the car and drove on. The radio stayed dead, screen black. That weirdly made me feel better. I figured it had to be an electrical glitch, maybe dust in the contacts or something. I didn't touch the radio the rest of the drive. Got to the motel around midnight, checked in, slept fine. The next morning, I went out to the car and turned the ignition. The radio came on by itself again, at the same low volume. Same blank screen, no station listed, just a hum like before. It was quieter now, but the same garbled sounds came back after about a minute. No words I could understand this time. Just mumbling. I left it on, hoping it would reset itself. I even tried unplugging the car battery for a few minutes. Didn't change anything. The voice came back again later that afternoon while I was driving. My name again, this time louder. No other words I could pick out, but it was like it was trying to say something, like someone trying to talk through layers of static. I pulled over and sat there, listening. I remember feeling stupid, like I was scaring myself over nothing, but I still didn't turn it off. I just listened. Then there was this part where it got really quiet, then one short, clear sound, like a syllable. I swear it sounded like someone saying, "behind." I turned around instantly. Just the empty back seat. Nothing in the rear view, but I floored it back onto the highway and drove until I hit the next town. Filled up on gas and left the car running in the lot for half an hour just watching the screen. The radio eventually shut itself off. The screen stayed lit, but there was no more sound. It happened again that night. Parked outside a gas station, engine off, keys in my pocket. The car was totally silent, then the speakers popped on. No screen, no lights. Just the same voice, low and messy, like it was underwater. I stood outside the car and listened. I could hear it through the closed windows. Not loud, but definitely there. I didn't sleep in the car that night. I found another motel and left the Subaru locked in the lot. I could still hear it when I was walking away, the soft rise and fall of some kind of voice, broken into syllables. I didn't hear my name that time, but I thought I caught another word, open. The next day, I drove straight to a dealership in Vegas, told them the whole thing, minus the name part. Just said the radio kept turning on when the car was off. They ran a full diagnostic and couldn't find anything wrong. They offered to replace the head unit for a few $100. I told them I'd think about it and left. I drove home with the radio unplugged. Literally pulled the fuse myself. No sound after that. The weird part is, about 2 weeks later, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. When I played the message, it was just this low static. Not like bad signal, more like something was holding the mic too close to a speaker. I couldn't hear anything clearly, but at the very end of the message, I thought I heard my name again. Just once. Same tone as before. I deleted the message. I still have the number written down somewhere, but I've never called it back. I don't think I want to. I was walking my dog around the back field behind my house when it happened. This was late August, a little after 9 p.m., so it was already dark out, but still warm. I live in a rural area in central Kentucky. No streetlights out here, no traffic sounds, just crickets and tree frogs and the occasional owl. I walk that same loop almost every night. The dog knows the path so well she barely needs a leash. We'd made it to the far edge of the field by the old broken fence where the tree line starts when I saw the flash. It was quick, maybe a second, maybe less, but it lit up the whole sky like lightning. Only it wasn't lightning. There were no clouds, no storm, and the light didn't spread from a single spot. It swept across the sky in a straight line, fast from north to south, like a shooting star but bright white, almost bluish and dead silent. The weird part, and I noticed it right away, was that everything went quiet. Completely. No bugs, no night birds. The dog stopped walking. She turned around and sat down right at my feet, staring at the sky. I thought maybe a coyote or something was nearby, but it wasn't that kind of quiet. It was wrong, like the air itself had muted. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds just listening. It was like being underwater. I couldn't even hear my own footsteps when I shifted my weight. The dog didn't bark or growl. She just sat there like she was waiting. Then, slowly, the normal sounds started coming back. First, a single cricket, then the frogs, then a whip-poor-will way off in the distance. Within a minute or two, everything sounded normal again. But the dog didn't move. I had to call her 3 times before she got up. I thought maybe it was a satellite or a meteor, but I've seen plenty of those. I've never seen one light up the entire sky like that. And I've never had the whole woods go silent afterward. We finished the walk early and went inside. I didn't tell my wife about it. It didn't seem worth mentioning. Just one of those odd little moments. But the next night, when I went out again around the same time, I noticed something. There were no insects. None. No cricket sounds, no cicadas, no frogs down by the creek. The sky was clear, stars out, warm air like the night before, but dead quiet. The dog acted normal for the first few minutes, but once we reached the same stretch of fence line, she stopped again. This time she didn't sit. She turned around on her own and started walking back toward the house, tail low. I followed her, didn't push it. As soon as we got back to the porch, the sound came back, slowly, like someone turning up a dial. I just stood there trying to figure out if I was imagining it. I didn't go back out that night. The next day, I walked the same loop around 6 p.m. before sunset. I brought a flashlight just in case, but I wanted to see if it felt normal during the daytime. It did. Birds were active. Bugs were everywhere. No weird silence. Then I looked up. There was something white caught high in the branches of one of the sycamores along the edge of the trail. It looked like fabric at first, like a plastic grocery bag that'd blown up there, but it wasn't moving at all, and there was no wind. I threw a stick at the branch, and it didn't budge. It looked almost stuck to the wood. I climbed the fence to get closer, but once I got underneath, I couldn't see it anymore. I circled the tree. Nothing. I don't know if it fell or what, but it was gone. That night, I didn't take the usual route. I just let the dog out in the backyard for a bit and stayed on the porch. She came back quickly and waited at the door to be let in, which wasn't like her. She usually loves being out there. A couple nights later, I think it was a Monday, I had trouble sleeping. Around 1:30 a.m., I got up and went to the kitchen to get a drink. From the window over the sink, I can see out to the far edge of the field, just before the woods, and I saw a light there, not moving, just hovering. Bright white, maybe the size of a beach ball, hard to say from that distance. It was just there above the grass, maybe 8 or 9 feet off the ground. No beam, no flickering, just steady. I turned off the kitchen light so I could see better. It stayed there. I watched it for maybe a minute, then went to get my binoculars from the closet. By the time I got back, it was gone. No sound. Nothing unusual on the wind. Just darkness again. I walked the field the next morning. I didn't see anything at first, but when I reached the spot where I thought the light had been, I noticed a ring of flattened grass. Not burned, not dead, just flattened in a circle maybe 6 feet across. No footsteps, no tire tracks. I didn't tell anyone about that either. That weekend, I drove into town to pick up some fencing materials and ended up talking with the guy at the feed store, a local named Tom who's lived here all his life. We talk about weather, gardening, usual stuff. I asked, just casually, if anyone around had seen anything strange in the sky lately. He went quiet for a second, then said, "You mean out by the timberline?" That caught me off guard. I hadn't mentioned where. I said, "Yeah, I guess so." He just nodded, didn't say anything else. I didn't push it. That night, I decided to sit outside on the porch again and just listen. The dog stayed next to me the whole time. Around 9:20, the crickets all stopped. Not slowly, all at once, like a switch flipped. The silence lasted maybe a minute, then came back just as suddenly. No lights in the sky that time. Nothing moved, but the dog was shaking. I haven't walked that far out since then. I stick to the yard, maybe the start of the trail, but I don't go back to that fence line. I still hear the frogs and the bugs most nights, and the stars are still out. But every now and then, everything just stops, only for a minute or two, then it comes back. But it's always after dark, always in that same direction, and always when I'm alone. I was about halfway through the drive when the fog got thick. Not just a little low-lying stuff. I'm talking full whiteout conditions, headlights barely doing anything, visibility maybe 20 feet at best. It was around 2:30 in the morning, mid-November, on a two-lane road cutting through national forest. I was heading back from visiting my sister out in the sticks, trying to make it back to my place before dawn. That road's usually dead after dark. No streetlights, no houses for miles, just forest and the occasional trailhead parking lot. I'd been on it dozens of times before, but that night felt different the moment the fog rolled in. Turned off the music so I could concentrate better, cracked the window a little so I could hear the tires on the road. I don't know why, but I get anxious driving in fog like that. You feel totally cut off. I was doing maybe 20 miles an hour, hugging the center line, just trying to stay between the faded paint and the shoulder. Every few minutes, I'd check the mirrors. I don't know what I expected to see, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. There weren't any other cars, no animals. Just that white tunnel and the wet hiss of the tires. Then I noticed a glow in the fog ahead. At first I thought it was a car coming toward me, high beams maybe. I slowed to a crawl, expecting to see headlights break through any second. But they didn't. The glow stayed where it was, kind of a soft white that flickered every now and then, not blinking, just sort of shifting. I crept forward, figuring maybe someone had pulled off and left their hazards on. But as I got closer, I realized the light wasn't on the ground. It was coming from above the trees. That's when I stopped the car. I rolled down the window all the way and stuck my head out. There was no sound. None. The usual forest noise was gone. No wind, no bugs, no distant highway hum. Just this weird, heavy silence and the glow pulsing overhead. I turned off the engine and stepped out of the car. The air felt colder than it had a few minutes earlier, and there was this odd pressure in my ears, like driving up a steep hill too fast. I walked to the edge of the road and looked up through the fog. That's when I saw it. It was huge. I couldn't see the whole shape. The fog was too thick. But parts of it would catch the light as it rotated. Not fast, just a slow, steady movement. There were lights in a pattern, definitely not random. A ring of them, faint but evenly spaced, and another row closer to the center. The way they moved suggested the thing was circular or disc-shaped, maybe a little domed. It was just above the treetops, maybe 100 feet up, drifting so slowly I couldn't tell at first if it was even moving at all. But what really got me was the silence. Something that size should have been making noise, engines, wind displacement, something, but there was nothing. Just that low, electric-looking glow pushing through the fog. I stood there watching it for I don't know how long. Could have been 5 minutes, could have been 20. Time felt weird. My phone said 2:41 when I checked, but it had said 2:34 right before I got out of the car. I don't remember more than a minute or two passing. Eventually, the lights started dimming. Not all at once, just section by section. First, the outer ring, then the center, like it was powering down. Then the whole thing tilted slightly, enough to catch more of the structure in the light. I saw what looked like ribbing or support beams on the underside, like the frame of a giant dome. And then it was just gone. I didn't see it leave. I blinked, and the lights were gone. The fog hadn't cleared, but it was like the glow had been sucked out of it. I ran into the middle of the road and looked in every direction. Nothing. No lights, no shapes, not even the low hum you sometimes get when power lines are nearby. Just fog. I got back in the car and started driving again. Didn't turn the radio back on, didn't even look at my phone. I just drove, checking the rear view every 30 seconds. About 10 minutes later, I passed one of those little gravel turnouts near a trail entrance. There was a car parked there, an old blue pickup, maybe 80s model, covered in mud. I slowed down a bit, thinking maybe someone had seen it too and pulled off, but there weren't any lights on, and I didn't see anyone inside. As I passed, I saw the driver's door was open. Not all the way, just cracked, like someone had stepped out in a hurry. The bed of the truck had a bunch of camping gear in it, and what looked like a rifle case. But no people, no flashlight beams in the woods, no movement. I didn't stop. I didn't see any other cars the whole rest of the drive, not even at intersections or gas stations. I got home around 4:15, way later than I should have. My normal ETA was 3:30. I wasn't speeding through the fog, but I don't remember slowing down that much either. I should have been home earlier. That pressure in my ears lingered all the way home. It finally popped when I stepped into my apartment. I tried to go to bed, but I kept thinking about the lights and how quiet it all was. I've never seen anything that size move like that. Or not move, I guess. Just hang there, watching. I was solo camping in northern Maine, not far from Baxter, mid-September. It was a last-minute thing. I'd had a stressful week and the weather looked decent, so I loaded up my pack, grabbed the dog, and drove out to one of the lesser-used trails I'd hiked before. I wasn't going deep, just a couple miles into this flat patch of woods near a stream. There's no official site there, but enough clear ground for a tent, and you can hear the water all night. I'd camped there once before with a friend, and it'd been peaceful. My dog, Maple, is a mutt, maybe part retriever, part shepherd. She's usually calm but alert. She loves hiking, sleeps lightly, never wanders far. She's also not dramatic, doesn't bark at squirrels or get skittish. That's why I bring her. We got there in the afternoon, set up the tent, filtered water, cooked a little meal. The forest was quiet, barely any wind. No other hikers passed us. Around dusk, I noticed how still it had gotten. No bugs, no birds. That happens sometimes, but this was sudden. One minute I was shooing away gnats, and the next it felt like everything just paused. The air got heavy, hard to describe. Maple noticed it too. She sat up straight, ears pinned forward, just staring into the trees. I looked but didn't see anything. No movement, no sound, no sounds. I even clapped, half joking, to break the weird silence, but it didn't help. It wasn't scary exactly, but I felt tense without knowing why. We went into the tent not long after that. I zipped up and tried reading with a headlamp while Maple curled up near the door. She kept lifting her head, sniffing the air. Eventually, around 10, I turned off the light and laid down. She didn't settle. Every 10 minutes or so, she'd sit up and stare at the front of the tent. No growling yet, just alert. That's not normal for her. I whispered for her to relax, scratched her ears. She stayed tense. Then around midnight, I woke up to a low, constant growl. Not loud, but deep. I could feel it more than hear it. Maple was sitting rigid at the door of the tent, staring straight ahead. Her teeth weren't bared, just that guttural warning she does when she really means it. I sat up and whispered her name. She didn't even flick an ear at me. I couldn't hear anything outside. No footsteps, no twigs snapping, just silence. I leaned over and unzipped the inner flap of the door a few inches. The outer flap was still shut, but there's a mesh screen between them, so I could kind of see shapes if there was light. The moon was bright enough to see the outline of the trees. Everything looked normal, but I had the strongest sense that something was just beyond my sightline. Standing still, watching. I didn't open the tent. I don't know why. I've never felt nervous in the woods before, but this time it felt like if I unzipped it all the way, something would be right there, so I didn't. Maple stayed that way for over an hour. No barking, no shifting, just staring, low growl rumbling in her chest. I eventually laid back down, fully clothed, with my boots half on. She didn't relax until after 2 a.m. I don't know the exact time, but I remember glancing at my phone a few times. No signal. battery still over 60%. She finally curled up again, but stayed close to Ned, resting her head on my leg. I drifted in and out of sleep after that. The woods stayed silent. In the morning, everything looked normal again. Light breeze, birds were back. I made coffee and checked around the camp, still feeling off. I expected to find deer tracks or something. Maybe a porcupine had wandered near, and that's what set her off. But about 15 feet behind the tent, I found these impressions in the moss. 3 of them, each one about the same size, maybe the width of a dinner plate, and spaced evenly in a line. Not boot prints, not paw prints, just smooth, shallow depressions, like something heavy had been placed there for a moment and then lifted again. The moss hadn't been torn up, just pressed down in a perfect oval. I put my foot next to one. It was longer than my boot by a good 6 inches. The spacing between them was weird, too. Too far apart for a walking stride, too even for an animal. They weren't in a straight line either, more like an angled triangle, if that makes sense. 1 in front, 2 behind. I looked for more, but didn't see any. They just started there and ended there. I even checked for marks on the trees, nothing. No broken branches, no disturbed dirt, just those 3 shapes, pressed into the moss like a stamp. I broke down camp fast after that. Maple stayed close, ears flicking, tail down. She didn't try to explore or sniff the area like usual. On the hike back, she kept glancing behind us. We didn't see anyone on the trail. When we got to the car, I checked my phone again. Full signal. I opened the camera app, thinking maybe I'd taken a photo the day before and forgot. The photos were fine, but the timestamp on one of the pictures I'd taken of Maple near the stream said 3:17 a.m. I didn't take any pictures in the middle of the night. I don't even remember touching my phone after I went to bed. The photo was blurry and off-angle, like the lens had brushed against something when it was taken. All you can see is part of her back and some grass. The flash hadn't gone off. That part stuck with me more than anything. I still don't know how it got there. I don't use my phone in my sleep, and Maple didn't have access to it. It'd been in my bag, zipped. I didn't camp alone again for a long time after that. I was out near the Mojave, a few miles north of Joshua Tree, trying to get some long exposures of the night sky. It was late, past midnight, and I was by myself. I've done solo desert trips for years, nothing new about that. I like the quiet, the isolation. Bring enough water, know your bearings, and it's fine. The sky's usually perfect out there, no light pollution, no noise. I had parked off a dirt road that cuts around some low hills, maybe an hour off the main highway. I set up on a flat stretch facing east, not too far from where the land dips into a shallow wash. Tripod, wide lens, 10-second shutter, usual stuff. It was dead still. No wind, not even bugs, just dry air and quiet. I was shooting in intervals, snap a few, check them, adjust. I'd been out there maybe 30-40 minutes when I noticed something weird with one of the photos. Everything looked normal, except there was this bright dot in the upper left corner that hadn't been there in the others. Thought maybe it was a plane at first, or a planet that had finally cleared the horizon. But when I looked up, I didn't see anything. I took another shot. It was there again, in a slightly different spot, but not trailing like a plane would. Just a pinprick, brighter than anything else in the sky, but sharp, too sharp. Not twinkling, just steady. I figured maybe it was a satellite, so I waited a few seconds, expecting it to drift like they do. It didn't. It just stayed put. That's when I noticed it was slowly getting bigger. Not like it was glowing or pulsing, just physically getting larger. Still round, still perfectly white, but bigger than before. I kept watching, trying to convince myself it was just an illusion, maybe rising through some kind of thin cloud layer, but there weren't any clouds. The sky was clear. I took another photo. When the exposure ended and the image popped up on the screen, the light was dead center, right above me. But I couldn't see it when I looked up. I stepped back from the camera and stared at the sky. Nothing. Stars. Darkness. I waited. Then, there it was again. Faint at first, off to the east where I'd originally seen it. It wasn't glowing or flashing, it was just there. And it was moving, not drifting, moving. Smooth, steady, not fast, but straight. Toward me. I could tell because the angle wasn't changing. Every few seconds it looked a little larger. Still dead silent, no wind, no bugs, no ambient sound at all. Just dry air and that tiny dot coming closer. I got a weird feeling in my chest. Not panic exactly, just this sense of being completely exposed. Like I just noticed how far from anything I really was. The truck was maybe 60 yards behind me. I could see the edge of its shape in the moonlight, but it felt way further than that. I packed the camera fast, not panicking, just deliberately fast. I didn't want to turn my back on the sky, so I kept glancing up between motions. Every time the light looked a little bigger. Still no sound, no blinking, no trail. By the time I had the camera packed up, it was maybe the size of a marble held at arm's length. That doesn't sound big, but it was big enough to feel wrong. Too big to be that steady. And I had no frame of reference. It was just this perfect white dot hanging in the black. I stood there, not sure what to do. It stopped. Just hung in the air a little above the horizon now, maybe a few degrees above the mountains. It didn't flicker, didn't sway, didn't shift color or anything. Just there. I must have stood there for 3 or 4 minutes. It didn't move, didn't get smaller, didn't grow, just stayed fixed. Then it was gone. Not like it zipped off or blinked out, it was just gone between one breath and the next. 1 second it was there, the next second I was staring at empty sky. I blinked hard, looked all over the sky, tried to see if it had moved, but there was nothing. I thought maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. Started to tell myself I was just tired, or maybe it was a satellite and the light angle changed or some weird lens artifact. But when I got back to the truck and looked at the camera screen again, the last photo I took before packing up had it. Bright, centered, slightly blurred from motion, but definitely there. Then I noticed something else. The clock on my truck was wrong. It was behind by almost 40 minutes. I'd set it earlier that day when I filled up in 29 Palms, synced it to my phone. My phone was still in airplane mode to save battery, but when I checked it, the time didn't match the truck or my watch. All three were off from each other by different amounts. None of them had the right time. That messed with me more than anything else. I drove back toward town slowly. Every so often I pulled over and looked up, trying to see if the light had come back, but it never did. The sky looked normal again. Planes, stars, the moon. Later, when I dumped the photos onto my laptop, the metadata on the last few shots was blank. No timestamp, no exposure data, nothing. Just blank fields. I've never seen that happen before. The files were there, the images showed up, but it was like the camera had no idea when or how they were taken. The rest of the trip was normal. No more lights, no more weird timing issues. But I didn't shoot again. Just drove home the next day. I still have the photos. They look like any other star shots, except for that one series. Perfect dot, steady arc from east to center frame, then gone. I haven't camped alone since. We were up near the Boundary Waters, middle of September, just me and Nate. Weather was decent when we started. Cool, overcast, no real wind. We'd been planning that hike for months, brought maps, printed backups, had everything loaded onto GPS and both our phones. I'd done that route once before years ago, so I had a rough idea of the turns. We'd been on the trail for maybe 4 hours when the clouds got darker, fast. It wasn't a gradual thing. 1 minute it was gray, next it looked like twilight. The temperature dropped a lot too, enough that we both stopped and grabbed our rain shells. I remember saying something like, "Let's push a little further, maybe get to that rock shelf near the ridge." That spot usually gave decent shelter. We barely made it. By the time we got under the overhang, it was pouring so hard you couldn't see more than 20 feet. Thunder, wind, sheets of rain, it hit like a wall. I checked my phone to see how long it might last, but the weather app wouldn't load. No service. Nate didn't have any bars either. Not too weird, that deep in the woods, but usually we got at least a sliver. We were sitting there, half crouched under the rock, trying to eat protein bars and keep dry, when I noticed my phone screen flicker. Just a little at first, like it was trying to rotate, even though I wasn't moving. Then the brightness dropped on its own. I turned it off and back on, but the screen came back up all scrambled, colored lines like a glitch. It froze, then went black. I thought maybe water had gotten in, even though it was in a sealed bag in my pack. I looked over and Nate was frowning at his watch. His digital watch was flipping through the settings on its own, like someone was pressing buttons. Then it reset completely. Year, time, everything. Zeroed out. Then his phone buzzed, made this high-pitched whine, and shut off too. We looked at each other, not really knowing what to say. I pulled out the compass, old school, liquid-filled dial. The needle was spinning. Not fast, just slowly turning in a circle and not stopping. That got to me more than the electronics. I shook it, tried it again on a flat rock, still turning, like it couldn't lock on to anything. I handed it to Nate without saying anything, and he just stared at it. For a while, we sat there in silence, listening to the storm and watching the rain run down the trees. At some point, I realized I wasn't hearing thunder anymore. The rain was still coming down hard, but there was no sound above it. No wind either, just dead quiet except the water. Then the light changed. It didn't get brighter or darker, just different. Hard to describe. Everything looked flatter, like when a storm rolls through and the light gets yellow and weird, except this wasn't yellow. It was more like bluish-white, but dull. Even under the overhang, we both noticed it. It felt wrong, like it wasn't coming from the sky. Nate stood up and looked around the edge of the rocks, said, "There's something glowing." I moved over next to him. Through the trees, maybe 100 yards out, was this faint bluish light hovering low, like ground level. Not bright, just barely there. It was hard to tell with the rain, but it wasn't moving much. I remember thinking it could have been a tent light or maybe moonlight bouncing off wet branches. Except the moon wasn't out and there were no other campers on that trail for miles. The light didn't flicker. It pulsed, slow and steady, like a heartbeat. We didn't talk. We just stood there and watched it for a while. I don't know how long. Eventually, the rain started to let up. The light faded out slowly, like someone turning a dimmer switch. Not like it blinked off, more like it receded. That was the last weird thing we saw directly, but stuff stayed off. When we finally packed up and got moving again, we realized our GPS trackers weren't syncing. Mine wouldn't turn on at all. Nate's booted up but just showed a blank map. Like we weren't anywhere. The little arrow that marks your location was stuck in one spot and wouldn't move. I pulled out the paper map and compass, hoping we could orient by landmarks. Except nothing matched. The ridge we were on didn't lead where it should have. The slope was wrong. The rocks were different. We hiked for almost an hour, thinking we were heading west, but the sun came up on our left. Eventually we found a trail marker, but it wasn't the same trail. Not even close. It was red instead of blue, and it had a number we didn't recognize, 237. The one we were on was 15B. I pulled the backup map, and there was no 237 on it anywhere. We figured maybe we'd looped around or gotten turned around in the storm somehow, so we followed the marker downhill, hoping it would link back to something familiar. About a mile later, we hit a gravel road. We hadn't seen a road on our route, not anywhere near where we thought we were. We followed it, thinking maybe it led to a ranger station or parking area. 20 minutes later, a guy in a pickup slowed down and rolled his window down. Asked if we were lost. I told him where we thought we'd started, and he kind of gave us this weird look. He said we were about 9 miles east of there. That didn't make sense. We hadn't covered that kind of distance, especially not with the storm, and definitely not uphill. He gave us a lift back to the main lot where we'd left the car. The guy didn't talk much, just kind of watched us in the mirror. When we got to the parking lot, both of us just sat in the car for a while, not really talking. I remember Nate eventually saying, "That wasn't weather," and I didn't argue. We checked our phones again once we had signal. Mine was totally dead, wouldn't take a charge. Nate's had reset the date to January 1st, 2000. No call log, no photos from the hike. Like everything from the last 24 hours had been wiped. We got back home late that night. I mailed the compass to a friend of mine who collects antique gear, just told him it was acting up and I didn't want to throw it away. He said it was magnetized wrong, like the poles were reversed and unstable, whatever that means. We haven't gone back to that trail. I still hike, but I don't go that deep anymore. Not without backup power and a satellite tracker. I never figured out what we saw, and I don't really want to. It was just after 3 a.m. when I pulled into the lot behind the Petro off I-80 in Nebraska. I'd been driving since Des Moines, and my back was screaming. My hours were almost up and I wasn't about to push it. I parked along the far edge of the lot, away from the other rigs, habit mostly. I like quiet when I sleep. I shut everything down, climbed into the sleeper, and cracked the window a little. There was a breeze, and it helped muffle the noise from the highway. I checked my phone, no messages, nothing missed, and set my alarm for 8. I usually wake up earlier, but I needed the rest. I remember drifting off to the sound of one of those big reefer units cycling on and off a few trucks over. Next thing I knew, I was awake again. No sound, no movement, just wide awake. It was still dark, but lighter than before, early dawn maybe. My clock said 5:24. What actually woke me up was my phone. Not ringing, already lit up, sitting face up on the shelf near my head, like it had just finished doing something. The screen said 1 new voicemail. No missed call, no notification from a number, just the voicemail icon. I sat up and stared at it for a second before picking it up. Checked the call log, nothing. No incoming calls since I'd left Iowa the night before. I tapped into voicemail and put it on speaker. It was just static. No voice, no tones, just that soft, low, crackling white noise. It ran for a few seconds before I heard this faint, weird tapping underneath it. Slow, steady, like something hitting metal, then pausing, then doing it again. I sat there listening, waiting for a voice or some clue, but it never changed. Just static and that tapping. I listened to the whole thing. 3 minutes, 2 seconds, then it ended. I played it again, same exact pattern. After the second time, I downloaded the message and tried to forward it to my buddy Cal, who used to mess with CB recordings and audio stuff. But the file didn't show up. I had the option to share, but when I tried, it said file not available. I went back to the voicemail list, and it was gone. Not deleted. Gone. Like it was never there. I sat there for a long time with the phone in my lap, trying to talk myself out of being weirded out. I checked my settings, rebooted the phone, went through the call log again. Still nothing. No number. No contact. I didn't go back to sleep. I climbed out of the cab around 6:30 and walked across the lot to the diner. Got coffee, eggs, the usual. Tried not to think about the voicemail. The waitress was chatty, and I let her talk at me for a while just to stay distracted. By the time I got back to my truck, the sun was up, and the lot was busier. I checked the truck, did my walk around, logged in my hours, and tried to settle back into normal. I'd almost convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing. I turned the key and the radio came on, tuned to AM 530 for some reason. I always keep it on FM or satellite, so that was strange. 530 is usually dead air, but it wasn't. I heard a low hum, like a carrier signal with no voice, just a steady tone. I changed it and moved on. I drove west for most of the day, stopping in Ogallala to refuel. Somewhere between North Platte and Sydney, I started to get this feeling like something was off. The air felt heavy, like pressure in my ears, but not quite, just enough to make me uncomfortable. Around that time, I noticed the CB was acting up. Channel 19 kept breaking in and out like someone was trying to talk, but cutting off before finishing. At first, I figured it was interference, but it wasn't weather. Sky was clear. Then I picked up this really faint signal, someone whispering numbers, one at a time. Long pauses in between. I listened for a couple miles, but it didn't repeat or make any sense. I flipped through channels. Nothing. When I stopped in Cheyenne that night, I checked my phone again. Still no trace of the voicemail. I even called my own number from a landline to check it. Empty. No saved messages. I slept okay that night, in a better lit part of the lot with a few other rigs nearby. But I kept waking up feeling like someone was standing just outside the cab. Every time I looked, no one was there. The next morning, I got a text. No name, just a number I didn't recognize. It said, that was it. Just the word tap in brackets, spaced like they were trying to match the rhythm. I didn't respond. I blocked the number, deleted the thread, and threw the phone on the passenger seat. For the next few days, nothing else happened. No messages, no voicemails, no weird audio. I finished my run and parked the truck at the yard back home. Took a few days off, tried not to think about it. A week later, I was sitting in my kitchen watching a movie on my laptop when I heard that same tapping. Not on the phone, in the house, from somewhere near the laundry room. 3 slow taps, hollow and sharp, like someone knocking gently on metal with a coin. I got up and checked. Nothing there. Back door locked. Washer and dryer off. That night, I turned my phone off completely for the first time in years. I still use the same number. I've never gotten that voicemail again. But sometimes, when I'm parked at some quiet truck stop late at night, the CB will pick up static for a second and I'll hear 3 faint taps underneath. Then silence. It started around 2:40 in the morning. I wasn't asleep yet because I'd stayed up watching TV in the living room. The volume was low, lights off, just the glow of the screen and my dog snoring next to me on the couch. The kind of dead quiet late night stretch where the whole neighborhood feels like it's holding its breath. I heard the first click from the motion light on the side of my house. Just outside the living room window, it makes this soft plastic pop when it turns on, and the light it throws into the yard is this cold blue-white that always makes everything look kind of off, like a fake version of my yard. I looked toward the window and figured it was probably a raccoon or one of the neighbor's cats. It happens sometimes. I didn't get up. Maybe 10 seconds later, I saw the light from my porch floodlights spill across the driveway. That one's not motion triggered. It's got a manual switch, but the motion sensor on the garage kicked on right after, lighting up the side of my car. Then the neighbor's yard lit up. Then the house across the street. One after another, every single motion light on the block turned on, like a wave going down the street. It wasn't all at once. There was maybe a second between each one, like something was moving past each house in turn. I couldn't see anything though. Nothing out the windows, no movement, no shadows. Just empty front lawns glowing under those harsh fake lights. My dog lifted his head and let out this low grumble. Not a bark, just that uneasy little growl he does when someone walks too close to the house. I muted the TV and just sat there listening. I live in a cul-de-sac, so it's not like there's through traffic or anything, just the same 10 houses. Most of them have ring cameras or some kind of security setup. I've got one too, pointing at the driveway, and I usually check the footage in the morning if something weird happens. But in the moment, I didn't want to move. I just kept looking out at the street, trying to see anything at all that would explain why every motion light had turned on. No cars, no wind. The trees weren't moving. It was totally still. Then the lights started turning off. Same order. Mine was first, then the garage, then the neighbors, then across the street. One by one, like something had gone down the block, and now it was coming back. I sat perfectly still. My dog got up, went to the window, and stared out, tail down, not making a sound. When the last light clicked off, it felt darker than before. I don't know how to explain it. The streetlights were still on, but they looked dim or farther away, like everything had shifted half a step to the left. I finally got up and looked out the front door. I didn't open it, just peeked through the peephole. Nobody was out there. The whole street was dead silent. I went back to the couch, but I didn't sit down. I stood there in the dark, not sure if I should wake anyone up. I live alone, but my brother was staying with me for a few days, sleeping in the guest room at the back of the house. I didn't want to scare him if this was nothing. I grabbed my phone instead and pulled up the app for my security cam. It had motion events logged, all spaced about 5 seconds apart, right in line with when the lights went on. I tapped the first one and watched the footage. Nothing. Just the car, the yard, the still bushes. No movement at all. I scrubbed through the whole clip. It lasted about 10 seconds, just the garage light flicking on and staying on. No bugs flying by. No branches swaying, not even a breeze. I checked the next one. Same thing. Light comes on, total stillness, then clicks off. I opened the camera feed live and looked through it while I stood at the window. It matched perfectly. Nothing moving, nothing strange. Just the empty driveway. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I stayed in the living room with the lights off and the camera app open. My dog sat by the door the whole time, ears up, staring at nothing. The next morning, I asked my neighbor, Ed, retired guy, nice enough, if his camera caught anything weird. He said he got a bunch of alerts, but when he checked, the videos were all blank. That night, I kept my porch light on. Left the blinds open too. Nothing happened. But the night after that, right around the same time, the lights did it again. Same order. Same slow chain reaction down the block. This time I recorded it with my phone from inside, just the window view. You can see the lights clicking on one after another. But when I checked the driveway footage again, nothing. No shadows, no raccoons, no bugs, just empty yards lighting up for no reason. It happened 3 more times that week. Always around 2:40 to 2:50 a.m., always in the same order, then back again. Then it stopped, never happened again. But every once in a while, I'll wake up in the middle of the night and think I saw a flash through the window, like one of those lights came on again. When I check, there's nothing. Just the dark, and my dog staring at the front door. It was a Saturday afternoon, mid-September, warm and clear. I'd driven out to an old gravel pit outside of town to fly one of my FPV drones. There's nothing really out there, just flat land, some trees off to the north, and a few rusted-out trailers way off in the distance. It's a good spot because there's no signal interference and nobody ever bothers me. I'd been flying for about 20 minutes, testing a new antenna and just cruising along the tree line. Around 4 p.m., I swapped to a fresh battery and decided to take it higher than usual, mostly just to test the range. The drone I had that day could handle some decent altitude and the air was calm. Everything looked normal for the first few minutes. The video feed was solid, telemetry was stable. I was maybe 300 feet up when I noticed something weird. In the top corner of my goggles, just barely in frame, there was a small white dot that didn't look like a plane. Too stationary. I assumed it was a distant star or something, even though it felt early for that. But as I turned the drone slightly, the object moved. Not smoothly, it jerked, like it snapped sideways a few degrees. Just a little, enough to be noticeable. I stopped the drone midair and adjusted the camera angle up a few degrees. I wanted to keep the object in frame. It wasn't moving like anything I'd seen. No drift, no slow pan. It would stay still, then dart to a new position in one sudden motion. Always small, sharp shifts, like it was cutting across angles instead of flying. I recorded everything. I kept the drone trained on it for about 3 minutes. The object stayed in roughly the same part of the sky, but it jumped around within that space, sometimes straight up, sometimes diagonal. Once it shot straight left and stopped instantly, no easing into it. I don't even know how to describe the speed except that it didn't look right. There was no sound. I wasn't close enough to expect any, but still. Then, for maybe 5 seconds, it started moving in a tight, perfect circle. Not an arc. Not like a bird or a balloon caught in wind. It did 3 full loops in exactly the same path, tight radius, even spacing, then stopped dead. I pulled the drone back a bit, thinking maybe I was getting interference or the video feed was bugging out. But everything else was stable. The OSD was clean, no frame drops or glitches. Then the object just disappeared. Not like it sped off, it just blinked out. Gone. I hovered for a bit longer, trying to find it again. Panned the camera around, tilted up and down, nothing. I brought the drone down and swapped the SD card into my laptop. The footage played fine. You could see the object, little white speck at the top of the screen, zipping around in those sharp, unnatural movements. It wasn't super clear, but it was there. Definitely not a bird or bug or plane. I clipped the relevant part and exported it as an MP4 so I could send it to a couple friends who fly too. When I tried to upload it to Google Drive, it failed. Said there was a network error, even though my signal was fine. I tried again, same thing. Tried a third time with a compressed version. Still wouldn't go. Then I noticed something weird. The file size kept changing. First it was 412 megabytes, then it said 405 megabytes, then 418 megabytes, without me doing anything. I opened the folder and watched it flicker. The video file kept disappearing and reappearing, like the computer couldn't keep it indexed. When I tried to play it again, the media player gave me an error, said the file was unreadable or corrupted. I tried opening the raw footage straight from the SD card. Same problem. It was just gone. Still there, technically, but I couldn't open or copy it anymore. No recovery software worked either. It was like the file was decaying in real time. I went back to the drone to see if maybe it was a card issue, but the drone wouldn't power on properly. It would beep, then shut down. I swapped batteries, checked the connectors. Nothing helped. Just dead. Later that night, I tried using a different computer. I plugged in the SD card and the whole system froze. Wouldn't even load the drive. I had to force shut it down. That SD card's sitting in a drawer now. Sometimes I think about sending it to someone who knows more about data recovery, but I haven't yet. Every time I plug it in, something else gets weird. It's like the footage just didn't want to be saved. I woke up in the middle of the night and immediately knew something was off. It was too quiet. My apartment always has this low background hum, fridge, old ceiling fan, a bit of noise from the hallway, but everything was dead silent. The kind of silence that feels heavy, like your ears are plugged. I sat up and looked at the clock by my bed. The screen was black. I tapped it a few times, then reached over and hit the lamp switch. Nothing. Power was out. The only light was from the moon coming in through the window, kind of hazy, like there were thin clouds outside. I grabbed my watch off the nightstand, one of those basic analog ones, and checked the time. 4:17 a.m. I remember thinking that was weird because I'd gone to bed around 11 and felt like I'd been asleep longer than 5 hours. I don't usually wake up in the middle of the night unless something loud happens, like a car horn or thunder. But this was different. It was just quiet. Then I noticed the ceiling fan was moving. Not fast, just slowly turning, but in reverse. It's one of those old pull chain types with wooden blades, and I always keep it on low overnight to help with the heat. Normally it spins clockwise, blowing air down, but it was going counterclockwise. And again, the power was out. I just sat there watching it for a few seconds, trying to figure out how that was possible. It wasn't spinning on leftover momentum. It had a rhythm, a steady speed like it was being powered. But everything else was dead. No digital clocks, no streetlights outside, even the fridge wasn't making noise. I got up and checked the window. I live on the 3rd floor, and my building faces an alley. Usually, there's a light at the far end that throws some orange glow onto the pavement. But it was pitch black. Couldn't see a thing except a pale reflection of my own face in the glass. I was going to check my phone for a flashlight, but when I hit the button, it didn't turn on. Battery had been over 70% when I went to bed. I tried holding the power button, nothing. Dead. I went to the bathroom and lit a candle I keep under the sink, just one of those little emergency tea lights. It was the only light I had. As soon as I lit it, I noticed the air in the apartment felt weird. Not stale exactly, but still. Like everything had stopped circulating. The candle flame didn't flicker. It just burned straight up. I stepped back into the bedroom and the fan had stopped. Just completely still, like it had never been moving. I looked up at it for a while, expecting it to twitch or wobble or something, but nothing. I checked my watch again. Still 4:17. I went out to the hallway. All the apartment doors were closed, no one moving around, no signs of other people even being awake. I stood there listening for footsteps or a toilet flush or anything, but the whole floor was dead silent. I tried the light switch in the hall just out of habit. Nothing. The whole building must have been out. I figured I'd go down to the lobby and see if anyone else was awake or if maintenance was around. The stairwell was pitch black, so I used the little tea light to light the way down. When I got to the lobby, the big windows were dark too. No cars passing, no light from the corner store across the street. It was like the whole block had been swallowed. I went up to the front doors and looked out. That's when I realized it wasn't just the building. There weren't any lights on anywhere. The street lights, the traffic signal at the corner, the apartment buildings across the way, nothing. Total blackout. But there wasn't a storm or anything. No wind, no rain, no emergency sirens. Just this quiet, dull silver light from the sky. I opened the door and stepped outside. It was cold. Not freezing, but colder than it should have been for that time of year. I walked a few steps into the street just to look around. That's when I noticed the sound. A low hum, really faint, like it was coming from underground or far away. Not mechanical, not like an engine or generator. Just a deep, steady vibration that I felt more than heard. Then I looked up. The sky wasn't right. I didn't notice it at first because it looked like a normal cloudy night. Pale gray with the moon barely visible behind it. But the clouds were moving in a circle, slowly but definitely rotating like the whole sky was being stirred. And the motion was centered right above my building. I kept staring, trying to make sense of it. The hum got a little louder. Not much, just enough that I could feel it in my chest. and then the streetlight across from me blinked on, just for a second. Bright white light, no flicker, and then off again. Same with the one next to it, like a pulse. Not a power surge, it was too controlled. One blink, off. Then another, a few seconds later. I backed toward the building, and when I got to the door, the lobby lights flicked on for half a second and went dark again. My watch still said 4:17. I went back up to my apartment. Everything looked the same. Fans still, phone still dead. The candle burned low on my bathroom counter. I sat on the edge of the bed and just waited. At some point, I don't remember feeling tired. I must have fallen asleep. When I woke up, the sun was coming through the window. The power was back. Fan was spinning the right way again. Clock on the microwave said 8:42. My phone turned on fine. Full battery, no missed calls or alerts. My watch was still stuck at 4:17. I took it off and left it on the nightstand. It's still sitting there. We were about 7 miles into the national forest, way off trail. It was me, my friend Daniel, and his cousin Mike. We'd gone in Friday morning and planned to stay until Sunday, just hiking and camping. Nothing too serious. The spot we picked wasn't on any map. Daniel had been there once before, years ago, and said it was perfect. Flat, quiet, lots of tree cover, no one around for miles. Everything was normal the first day. We got in, set up camp, filtered water from the creek, made a fire. I think it was around 9:30 when we turned in. We were using hammocks with rainflies, each strung a little ways apart, but within sight of the fire pit. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. I wasn't sure why. It wasn't a sound or anything. I just opened my eyes and felt weird. Like the air was too still or I'd missed something. I sat up in the hammock and looked around. At first, I didn't see anything. It was quiet, just the usual soft forest sounds, a bit of wind through the trees, maybe an owl in the distance. But then I noticed a red light through the trees. Faint, but definitely there. About shoulder height, not high up like a drone or plane. It was just sitting between the trees, not moving. I thought it might be someone with a headlamp or lantern, maybe another camper who'd wandered too close. But we hadn't passed anyone all day, and we were way off any trail. I whispered toward Daniel's hammock, just a low, "Hey." No answer. I figured he was asleep, so I unzipped my bag, got my boots on, and stepped out. As soon as I moved, the light blinked out. Just gone. I walked a few steps toward where it had been, shining my flashlight around. Nothing. Just trees and underbrush. No sign anyone had been standing there. I circled back to camp, stood by the fire pit for a minute, then climbed back in and tried to go back to sleep. About 20 minutes later, I saw it again. Same red light, same spot, more or less. It hadn't come from anywhere. It was just there. Still. No flicker, no pulsing. Just a small red glow. I stared at it for a long time, not moving. Then I noticed a second one. Slightly farther off to the right. Dimmer, like it was deeper in the woods. That's when Daniel spoke up, quietly. "You see that too?" I nodded, even though I wasn't sure he could see me. We both sat there watching it for what must have been 10 minutes. Then it started to move, not fast, just a slow glide sideways, maybe 20 feet, then stopped. Then the second one did the same thing in the opposite direction. We both got out of our hammocks, didn't even say anything, just started walking toward the closer one. As soon as we moved, both lights went dark again. We stopped, stood there for a minute, then turned around. Mike was still asleep, or at least pretending to be. He didn't say anything. We went back to bed, or tried to. I couldn't sleep. Every time I opened my eyes, I saw it again. Same red light, different spot, always the same distance from camp, always disappearing when we got close. It did that all night. We never saw it move directly, just blink out and then reappear somewhere else a few minutes later. Once I saw it behind Mike's hammock. Then it was gone again. Always red. Always hovering at about chest height. At one point, I tried to shine my flashlight on it, but it didn't help. The beam just seemed to fade out before it reached it, like there was mist or something between us, even though the air looked clear. Sometime around 4 a.m., I gave up on sleeping. I just sat by the fire, feeding it occasionally, watching the trees. The light didn't come back after that. Or maybe it did, and I just stopped noticing it. Hard to say. In the morning, we didn't talk about it much. Mike said he hadn't seen anything. Daniel just looked tired and didn't want to hike deeper in like we'd planned. So we stayed in camp all day, mostly just kept to ourselves. That night, around the same time, maybe just after midnight, it came back. This time, there were three, all red, all the same soft glow, same weird movements. They didn't react to sound or light, didn't follow a pattern, just appeared, hovered, disappeared, always just out of reach. I tried walking up to one again, more slowly this time. I got maybe 15 feet from it before it blinked out. No sound, no flicker, just gone. I stood there for a while thinking maybe I'd see a person or a light source, but there was nothing. I even tried taking a picture with my phone. Didn't work. The screen stayed black. The light didn't show up, even though I could still see it with my eyes. Later, when I checked the gallery, the photo wasn't there. We left first thing in the morning. Packed up before sunrise, didn't eat breakfast, just hiked out in silence. No one said anything until we were back at the car. Even now, I don't know what to make of it. I've been back to that area since. Same trail, same cutoff into the woods, but I've never seen those lights again. We were driving home from a friend's place in the next county over. It was around 11:30 at night, late summer, and we'd taken this back road that cuts through a bunch of farmland because it was faster, and we liked how quiet it was. No streetlights, no traffic, just that kind of two-lane road where it feels like you're the only people awake in the whole state. It was just me and Marissa. She was in the passenger seat, nodding off. I had the windows down a bit and the radio on low, mostly to keep myself from zoning out. We weren't in a rush, and I wasn't speeding, just kind of coasting along. I remember the road was dead straight for a long stretch. Fields on both sides, some short barbed wire fencing here and there, and the occasional silo or barn way off in the dark. There wasn't much moon that night, just enough to see a faint glow on the cornfields. At some point, I noticed this tiny white light, low to the ground, maybe a few hundred yards out into one of the fields on the right. At first, I thought it was a flashlight or maybe a piece of farm equipment, but it wasn't moving, and it didn't look like it was connected to anything. I didn't say anything right away, just slowed down a little and leaned forward a bit to get a better look. The light wasn't very bright, more like a pinpoint, but it stood out because there was nothing else out there. No houses, no people, no other cars, just this one little white dot hovering maybe a foot above the corn. As we got closer, it rose. Not fast, just slowly, like a balloon, straight up, smooth, and steady. It went from maybe a foot above the ground to about 20, then 30, then higher. I pulled the car over onto the gravel shoulder and cut the engine. Marissa stirred and sat up, confused. I pointed. "Do you see that?" She squinted through the windshield. "What is that?" We both watched it rise. Totally silent. There was no hum, no wind, no rustling in the corn. The light didn't flicker or wobble. It just kept going up until it was maybe 100 feet above the field, then stopped. Just stayed there, completely still. By then, we were both leaning over the dashboard, staring up through the windshield. It was just this one point of light, small but clearly not a star. Closer, brighter, still no sound. It stayed there maybe 30 seconds, maybe a minute, hard to tell. Time felt weird. Neither of us said anything. Then it moved. It didn't fade or drift. It just shot straight up, instantly. 1 second it was there, and the next it was gone. No trail, no flash, just a quick white streak upward that ended in nothing, like it had punched through the sky and disappeared. We sat there in silence for a while. No other cars passed. The corn didn't move. The night didn't go back to normal. It was like everything paused with us. Eventually, Marissa turned to me and said, "That wasn't a drone." I didn't answer. I couldn't think of anything to say. I turned the key and the car started fine. Headlights came back on. We drove the rest of the way home in silence. Neither of us checked the time. We didn't want to. I was out on Lake Crescent, Washington side, late last September. It's a deep lake, cold even in the summer, but it's quiet and way less crowded than the spots closer to the cities. I'd taken a couple days off work and was staying in this tiny rental cabin up near the North Shore, close enough to hike to the water with my kayak. That night, the water was like glass. No wind, no boats, just me. I'd brought a small headlamp and a waterproof flashlight, but I wasn't using either at first. Moon was out, almost full, so I could see just fine. The lake was lit up just enough to paddle slow and not worry about hitting anything. I didn't go far, maybe a half-mile offshore, just enough that the cabins were little yellow dots behind me. I stopped paddling after a while and just drifted. It was dead quiet. Could hear the water tapping against the hull and nothing else. That kind of quiet gets in your head after a bit. I was just sitting there thinking about heading back when I noticed a glow under the water. Not on the surface. Not a reflection. It was coming from below. 3 spots of light, maybe 20 feet away, all spaced the same distance apart, maybe the shape of a triangle. They weren't super bright, just enough to look unnatural, sort of soft, pale, bluish white. No pulsing, no movement at first, just sitting there under the surface. I leaned over the side and tried to see how deep they were, but it was impossible to tell. Lake Crescent is clear in the daytime, but at night it's like looking into ink. The lights didn't ripple or shimmer. They were steady, like they weren't being affected by the water at all. I sat there a good minute, just watching. Thought maybe it was a trick of the moonlight or some kind of bioluminescent thing, though I've never heard of anything like that in freshwater. Then the lights shifted. Not much, just a slow glide, maybe a couple feet, keeping the same triangular shape. Then they stopped again. That's when I turned on my flashlight. I didn't point it directly at them at first, just kind of angled it into the water. When I did, they reacted immediately. All 3 lights moved at once smoothly, like they were connected somehow. They didn't dart away, just sank. Straight down and fast. I pointed the flashlight directly at where they'd been. Nothing. Just dark water. I waited, turned the light off again, waited longer. I drifted a little closer to the spot where they'd been, trying to stay quiet. No sounds, no bubbles, nothing rising up, just gone. That's when I noticed how cold the air had gotten. Not chilly, cold. My hands started feeling numb. I hadn't even been out that long. I checked my phone. The screen wouldn't wake up. Thought it might have died, but when I pressed the side button, it buzzed faintly, like it was turning on, then nothing. I figured it was just the battery. Set it aside and started paddling back, but the water felt heavier. Not rougher, just like the kayak wasn't gliding the same way, like something had changed about the lake itself. I kept having to correct my angle like I was being pulled slightly to the left. No wind, no current, just this low drag. I stopped again to catch my breath. That's when I noticed something else. The lake had gone totally silent. I know that sounds weird, it's always quiet out there, but even the little noises were gone. No creaking of the kayak, no sound of the paddle hitting water, just total, full silence, like I was in a vacuum. Then I heard this really faint sound from below, not a splash, more like a soft ticking, slow and even, like something lightly tapping against metal underwater. Tick, tick, tick. I leaned over again, didn't see anything. The sound stopped. I pulled the paddle in and just sat there, trying not to move. I kept scanning the surface around me, then looked up at the sky. The stars were out, clear as ever, but the moon was gone, like, gone. No clouds, just black where it had been 20 minutes earlier. That's what finally pushed me into motion. I started paddling hard toward the shore, keeping my head low, eyes on the tree line. I didn't look back. The whole way in, I kept waiting for a splash or light behind me, but nothing came. When I reached the shore, I dragged the kayak halfway up the rocks and sat down shaking. Checked my phone again. It lit up immediately. Full battery, full signal. The time was off by 23 minutes. Back at the cabin, everything looked normal. Lights were on. My watch still showed the wrong time. I checked the weather. Clear skies all night, no reports of weird moon phases or anything like that. I tried to sleep, but I kept thinking about how those lights moved, how they sank in sync like they knew I was there. I haven't gone out on the lake after dark since. My son started talking about it in early March. He's 6, and we've never had any real issues with nightmares or anything like that. He sleeps through the night. The night doesn't ask to leave lights on. He's always been really steady that way. So I paid attention when he suddenly started getting nervous about bedtime. The first time he mentioned it, I was tucking him in, and he asked me to close his curtains. They were usually open a little so the moonlight could come in. He liked that. But this time, he said, "Can you close them all the way?" I don't want it to see me tonight. I paused and asked what he meant by it, and he just pointed toward the window and said, the shape that follows the moon. His tone wasn't dramatic or scared, just matter of fact, like he was saying something totally normal. I didn't press. I figured it was something he saw in a cartoon, or maybe he misunderstood something from school. I told him there was nothing to worry about and closed the curtains, just to make him feel better. But the next few nights he kept asking, did you close them all the way? Don't let it see in. And then one night, this must have been maybe a week after that first time, I asked him directly what he was seeing. He said it was a bright shape, kind of like the moon, but sharper, and that it moved when the moon moved. I asked him what he meant by sharper. He said it has corners, like a triangle or a tooth, which was weird enough on its own, but the way he said it, again, just plain and calm, made it stick in my head. That night I checked outside after he went to bed. Nothing. The sky was clear. Full moon, stars. No weird lights, no reflections, no sounds. Our street is quiet, cul-de-sac, no through traffic. I even walked down the block to see if anything looked off from another angle. All normal. Then the next night, I was doing dishes after he went to bed, and I saw him standing in the hallway near the window. I called to him. He didn't answer. I dried my hands and walked over, and he was just staring out through a gap in the curtain. His face was blank, but he looked like he was concentrating. I asked what he was doing, and he said, it's back, but it's not moving tonight. I looked out with him. I didn't see anything, just the moon over the neighbor's house and some light cloud cover. But then, just for a second, I saw something move. I don't know how to describe it exactly. It was like a glint, not a light, but a brightness in a specific shape. Not round, more like a bent corner. It was high up, not too far from the moon, and it didn't blink or shift like a plane or satellite. It was just there. Then it was gone. I asked him if that's what he meant. He nodded. It hides when you see it, he said. That's when it stopped feeling like a kid's imagination. The next day, I went through his room, wondering if maybe the reflection from something in the house, some object or sticker or toy that might throw light at night. Nothing. I even laid in his bed at night and opened the curtains to try and see what he might be seeing. Again, nothing. The sky was empty, but he kept talking about it. Never scared, just watchful. One morning he told me, it got closer last night. It looked like it wanted to come down. I asked him how he knew that, and he said because the moon moved fast and it followed. That really got to me. He had no way of knowing the moon doesn't actually move in that way, not from his point of view. He didn't say it rose or set, he said it moved fast. And he wasn't smiling or trying to spook me, he just said it while he was brushing his teeth. I started making sure his window was fully shut and locked. No reason, just felt like I should. I even set up one of those cheap wildlife cameras in his room, pointing toward the window. Motion activated. I didn't tell him. I just wanted to see if I could catch headlights or animal something that might explain it. For 3 nights, nothing. Then on the 4th, the camera triggered 3 times between 2 and 2:10 a.m. I checked the footage. The first 2 clips were nothing, just the window and the edge of his bed. No movement, no sound. The 3rd clip, I don't know. The image glitched. It wasn't like a tech error. It was like a flash of light hit the lens, but only on one side. Like someone had a flashlight just barely in frame, but from above, outside the window. It lasted half a second, and then it was normal again. I checked outside in the morning. No footprints, no signs of animals. The window screen was fine, no damage. The weirdest part was that I couldn't stop thinking about that flash. It had the same color as the shape I thought I saw the night I stood with him. Not white, more silvery. Like bright metal in sunlight, except it was the middle of the night. I didn't tell him about the camera. I just started keeping his curtains closed all the time. He didn't argue. Then about a week later, things stopped. No more comments, no more watching the window. He started sleeping in again, stopped asking if I'd closed the curtains. I waited a couple days, then finally asked if he still saw the shape. He said no, it found someone else. I asked what he meant. He just shrugged and said, it was looking. It's not looking here now. That was it. I took down the camera and went back to normal routines. But a few days after that conversation, I checked the footage one last time. Nothing new, but I noticed something I hadn't before. The glitch in that last clip? It wasn't just light. There was a shadow behind it. Not on the window, on the floor. For maybe 2 frames, there was a triangle-shaped shadow stretching across the carpet, pointing toward his bed. It didn't move, just appeared, then vanished. I deleted the clip. I was out in the field behind my parents' place. They live out near the edge of town where it's mostly farmland and woods, and I'd driven up for the weekend to help my dad patch a section of roof. It was Saturday night, probably around 10:30, and I'd gone out with a blanket and a thermos to lie in the grass and look at the stars for a bit. I don't get to see them much where I live now. Too much light pollution. But out there, you can see everything. It was cool out, clear sky, barely any wind. I laid flat on my back with the blanket tucked under me and just kind of zoned out watching the sky. I remember seeing Orion first, then spotting the Pleiades and Cassiopeia. Just tracing the familiar shapes. Nothing unusual. I'd been out there maybe 15-20 minutes when I noticed a tight little group of lights near the Big Dipper. I don't remember exactly how many, maybe 6 or 7, but they were faint, like stars you'd only see in a really dark sky. Nothing that jumped out right away. What made me notice them was how perfectly they were spaced. Not a perfect line, but almost like a shape. Not a real constellation, but it felt intentional somehow. At first, I assumed it was just a cluster I didn't recognize. I've seen a lot of satellite formations too, and I figured maybe it was something like that. But then I noticed the lights weren't moving like satellites, or like planes. They weren't blinking, they weren't streaking, they just kind of hovered in formation. And then slowly, really slowly, they started to shift. Not in unison. Not like they were all attached. It was more like they each started drifting apart at slightly different angles, just a few degrees at first. But it was enough to notice that they were breaking the pattern they'd been in. I sat up, watched them. They moved so slowly it was hard to tell they were moving at all unless I looked away and then looked back. Over maybe 2 minutes, they had clearly separated into 2 groups. 3 stayed clustered together, the others spread wider. That's when I realized I couldn't hear anything. I hadn't noticed it before, but the field is usually buzzing at night. Crickets, tree frogs, sometimes coyotes howling way off. But it had gone completely silent. Not like I'd tuned it out. Like it had just stopped. I stood up and listened. Nothing. Not even wind. The air felt weird, too, like pressure. Not cold, not hot, just heavy somehow. I took a step back toward the house without really meaning to, still watching the lights. Then they started to move faster. Not like falling stars or anything dramatic, just a steady gliding movement, each light drifting off in its own direction, no sudden changes, no flashing. But it was clear they weren't stars. Stars don't drift out of formation like that. One of them peeled off entirely from the others and started moving in a long arc. Not straight across the sky, but a curved path that looked deliberate. I don't know how else to describe it. It wasn't just drifting. It looked like it was headed somewhere. I was watching that one when something flickered in my peripheral vision. I turned my head and saw a quick flash of white-blue light way off to the left, near the tree line behind the barn. Not in the sky, on the ground, or just above it. It was brief, maybe half a second, but bright enough to light up the tops of the trees. Then darkness again. I didn't move for maybe a full minute. I just stood there with my hands in my pockets, heart starting to pound, staring into the woods like I was waiting for something else to flash again. But nothing did. When I turned back to the sky, the lights were gone. All of them. I scanned everywhere. Nothing. Just regular stars. I tried to trace where they'd gone, but it was like they'd never been there. I finally grabbed the blanket and thermos and started walking back toward the house. My shoes were damp from the grass, and I remember how loud my footsteps sounded, like there was no other noise for them to blend into. Halfway to the porch, I heard this low clicking sound. Not mechanical, more like a tongue click, but fast and rhythmic. It was coming from the direction of the trees. I turned and stood there for a second, squinting toward the barn. It was pitch black past the back fence, and I couldn't see anything, but the clicking kept going. 3 clicks, pause, 3 clicks again. Then nothing. Then a single long one, like a drawn-out snap. Then silence again. That's when the porch light behind me turned off. It was on when I left. My dad always leaves it on after dark. I turned back toward the house. The windows were all dark, and the front room light that had been on earlier was off too. I stood there staring at it, thinking maybe the power had gone out, but I could hear the fridge humming as soon as I stepped inside. I flipped the porch switch up and down. Nothing. Then the light blinked on by itself. I didn't go back outside. I locked the door, double-checked the back door, and sat in the kitchen with a cup of water, just trying to make sense of everything. The next morning, my dad asked if I'd unplugged the router during the night. I said no. He said the internet had gone out for about 20 minutes and the clock on the microwave had reset. I asked if the power had gone out. He said no. All the breakers were fine and nothing else in the house had reset. I told him a bit of what I'd seen, the lights moving, the clicking, but left out the part about the porch light and the flash by the woods. He just shrugged and said, maybe I saw some drones or something. I know what drones look like. I've flown a few. They don't move like that. And they don't make everything go silent. We've had the weather station at the house for a couple years now. It's one of those kits you get online, a basic setup with sensors for temperature, humidity, pressure, and radiation, among other things. My dad's pretty into gadgets and tracking local weather patterns, so he installed it out back on the shed roof. It logs data every few minutes and sends it to an app on our phones. Nothing fancy, but it's been reliable. The night everything got weird started like any other. The sky was clear, no clouds, and the air was still, almost no wind at all. I was home alone. My parents had gone out for the evening to visit some friends. I was just hanging out, scrolling through my phone in the living room, windows open because it was warm but not hot. I glanced over at the weather station app around 10:15 p.m. because I'd been tracking some humidity changes for a little project at school. Everything looked normal. Temperature steady around 68 degrees Fahrenheit, humidity at 60%, barometric pressure holding at about 1,015 millibars. Pretty typical for that time of year. But then at 10:22, I saw something odd. The radiation level on the app suddenly jumped, not just a little, but sharply, like it quadrupled within a minute. The spike was brief. By 10:24, it was back to normal, but that caught my attention. I figured maybe it was a glitch or a cosmic ray or something, so I shrugged it off. A few minutes later, at 10:29, the atmospheric pressure did the same thing. A sudden jump of about 20 millibars, and then it dropped back down just as fast. The app even logged it as a warning, saying, "Rapid change detected." That didn't make sense with the calm night. I looked out the window, and the trees were motionless. No storm or weather system nearby, according to the local forecast either. By then, I was kind of curious, so I stepped outside. The backyard was quiet except for some distant crickets. No wind at all. I walked over to the weather station mounted on the shed. The hardware looked fine, no damage or anything weird. I checked the sensors. None of them were warm or cold, nothing physically out of place. I pulled out my phone again and reloaded the app. The data was still showing those spikes from earlier. I stood there a minute, looking up at the stars. Clear sky, maybe half a moon. That's when I noticed the silence. It wasn't just the lack of wind or city noise. The usual ambient sounds, crickets, frogs, even distant dogs barking, had stopped completely. It was a thick, unnatural quiet. I started feeling a little off, like I was being watched or something was just waiting out there. I scanned the tree line at the far edge of the yard, but didn't see anything. No movement, no shapes, nothing that looked out of place. I decided to go back inside. As I stepped toward the porch, I caught a glimpse of light flickering near the horizon, a faint glow low in the trees beyond the field behind our property. It wasn't like a flashlight or a campfire. The color was pale, almost bluish-white, and it pulsed slowly, like a heartbeat. I froze for a second, watching it. The glow didn't move closer or farther away, just pulsed steadily for maybe a minute. Then it faded completely. Back inside, I closed all the windows and doors, locked them, and sat on the couch. The house felt strangely cold, like the temperature had dropped a few degrees, but the weather station inside was still reading normal room temp. I kept an eye on the app. The radiation and pressure readings stayed steady after those initial spikes. But then about 20 minutes later, the radiation went up again briefly, though not as sharply. The pressure stayed steady after the first jump. At around midnight, I thought I heard something, a low hum, almost like a distant engine, but it was soft and almost too low to be sure. It lasted a few seconds and then stopped. I checked outside again, but there was nothing to see. The night was still pitch black and quiet. I tried calling my parents, but they didn't answer. The cell service was fine otherwise. I texted a friend, but didn't hear back. The next morning, my dad looked at the weather station data when he got home. He said the spikes were real, not sensor errors, but nothing else unusual showed up in the area. The local news reported clear weather, no storms, or anything that would explain rapid pressure changes or radiation spikes. We checked the station again and tested the equipment thoroughly. Nothing was broken or malfunctioning. The place around the house looked completely normal, no signs of disturbance. I kept thinking about that quiet, the pulsing light, and how everything just felt off. Like something was there but wasn't supposed to be. We never figured out what caused the readings or what that light was. The data logs still sit on the app. Sometimes, late at night, I pull them up and look at those spikes, wondering if whatever it was might come back. I was out running one evening on a trail behind my apartment. It's nothing fancy, just a narrow path winding through some trees, a place I've gone plenty of times before. I usually run late, after most people have gone home. That night, it was around 9:30. The sun had just dipped below the horizon and the sky was turning dark blue. There were still some sounds, crickets, rustling leaves, the occasional bird settling down, but mostly quiet. I wasn't feeling great that day, kind of off and tired, but I figured a run might help. I kept a steady pace, breathing evenly, focusing on the trail ahead. About 10 minutes in, I noticed something weird. It was this low hum, almost like a distant engine, but not quite. It wasn't a normal sound you'd hear in the woods. It was deeper, almost vibrating in my chest. At first, I thought it was coming from a nearby road or maybe some kind of machinery. But the trail is pretty isolated, and I hadn't heard anything like it before. The hum wasn't steady either. It sort of pulsed, like it was breathing. I slowed down, trying to figure out where it was coming from, but the sound felt like it was all around me, coming from nowhere and everywhere at the same time. Then my vision started to get weird. It wasn't blurry exactly, but the edges of everything seemed to ripple, like looking through a thick, wavy glass. It was subtle but noticeable, and it made me stumble a little. The hum got louder, low enough that I could feel it in my head, almost like it was shaking my eyeballs. I stopped running. The woods around me looked strange, the shadows shifted oddly, and the usual colors seemed muted. I turned in a slow circle, trying to locate the source, but the hum and the visual effect stayed the same no matter where I looked. It felt like time slowed down and everything got heavy, like gravity was stronger. I don't remember how long I stood there, maybe a minute, maybe more. Then the hum just stopped, like someone turned off a switch. The rippling in my vision vanished and everything snapped back to normal. Colors, shapes, sounds. The crickets started chirping again and a cool breeze rustled the leaves. I looked down at my watch. That's when I noticed something weird. I'd just been running a steady pace, but now the distance on my app showed I jumped forward by about half a mile. No way. I had no memory of running that far without noticing. I checked the time. Only a couple minutes had passed. I tried to piece it together. Had I blanked out? Tripped and fallen without remembering? But my legs weren't scraped. My clothes weren't torn. Nothing felt out of place except that sudden skip in distance. I started jogging again, but the woods felt different. Quiet in a way that made me nervous. Every few steps, I kept looking behind me, like I was expecting to see someone, or something, but there was no one. A few minutes later, I passed a small clearing where the moonlight spilled through the trees. The air smelled faintly burnt, like something had smoldered there recently, but I couldn't see any signs of fire. No ash, no charred leaves. I shook my head and kept going, trying to convince myself it was just a trick of the light or a weird stretch of imagination. When I finally got back to the apartment, my legs were sore, but otherwise I felt fine. That night, I kept thinking about the hum. how it made my vision wobble, and that jump on the app. I've run that trail dozens of times before, and nothing like this ever happened. I still don't know what caused it or why I lost part of my run without realizing. But whenever I think about it, there's this quiet wait, like something was there in the woods, watching, waiting. I haven't gone back to that trail after dark since. I was flying a small Cessna over the northern wilderness that evening, just doing some routine practice runs. It was late spring, and the weather was clear. No clouds, no wind, just that quiet kind of calm you get over all those trees and lakes where no one lives for miles. I was cruising at about 3,000 feet, nothing complicated, just checking my instruments and enjoying the silence up there. About 20 minutes into the flight, something caught my eye out the side window. At first, I thought it was a plane or a drone, but it was too low and moving oddly. It was a single light, maybe about the size of a car headlight, and it was below me, somewhere between the treetops and the open patches of the forest floor. The thing was pacing me perfectly, keeping the same distance and speed, but never changing direction. I figured maybe it was some kind of searchlight or flare from the ground, but there was nothing on my radar, no radio calls, and I knew that area pretty well. There shouldn't have been any people or planes around, especially not that low. I glanced down a few more times, and every time I looked, the light stayed in the exact same position relative to my plane, like it was locked onto me. At first, I thought maybe I was seeing reflections or some weird trick of the light off my own instruments, so I checked inside the cockpit. No flashing lights, no warnings, just the usual green and red lights on the panel. The light outside was steady, not blinking or changing color. I decided to slow the plane a little and bank to the right to see if it would follow. It did. I leveled off and turned left, still there. Whatever it was keeping pace with me, and it wasn't showing any sign of slowing down or leaving. The weirdest part was how quiet it was. No engine noise or anything, just the faint hum of my own plane. The light wasn't attached to anything I could see, no shape or structure, just a glowing orb of light. I tried to spot it against the trees or the ground, but it just hovered in midair, sometimes moving above the treetops, sometimes dipping low, always following me. After a few minutes, I thought maybe it was a helicopter following me or some kind of ranger patrol. I tried calling the local flight control on the radio, but the channel was silent, no response. I checked my phone when I landed later, and there were no missed calls or messages. Then I decided to test something. I banked sharply left, a tighter turn than before, thinking maybe it would lose me or break off. Instead, the light stopped moving. It hovered perfectly still in midair, not following my turn at all. I kept turning, watching it out the window. The light stayed there, just floating like it had frozen in place. For a moment, I thought it might disappear, but it didn't. It just stayed put, bright and steady against the dark green of the forest below. After a few seconds, I leveled off and looked back. The light was gone. No flicker, no trail, nothing. Just the empty sky and treetops. I finished the flight and landed without any other strange incidents, but the whole time I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, tracked by something I couldn't explain. When I got home, I told a couple of pilot friends. They were skeptical, saying it was probably a drone or another plane, but none of them had a good explanation for why it would just stop in midair and vanish like that. I checked the weather and radar data for that area later. Nothing unusual, no aircraft, no storms, just clear skies. I even looked at satellite images the next day, but there was no sign of anything unusual on the ground. I keep thinking about that light. It wasn't hostile, but it wasn't normal either. And the way it held its position when I tried to lose it, that's what keeps me wondering. I was about halfway through my shift when I first noticed something weird. I work as a security guard at a pretty nondescript office building on the outskirts of town. Mostly quiet at night, except for the occasional car passing by or a raccoon rummaging through the trash. Nothing that usually keeps me on edge. That night, the fog had rolled in thicker than usual. It wasn't the kind of fog that makes everything disappear, more like a low, creeping mist that clings to the ground and swallows up the edges of the parking lot. I had just finished my usual patrol around the building, checking the doors and windows, making sure nothing was out of place. When I got back inside the security room, I switched on the monitors to review the cameras. The building's old, so the setup isn't the best. Standard security cameras with some thermal ones for the outdoor perimeter. It's mostly routine, but I always keep an eye out just in case. As I scanned the feeds, one of the outdoor cameras caught my attention. The fog had thickened right where the lot meets the trees. At first, it looked like a shadow or maybe just the fog moving, but then the shape took form. Something hovering just above the ground, maybe 6 or 7 feet high. It didn't look like any person or animal, though. More like a blurred, solid outline, but the edges were too smooth to be a tree branch or a trash bin. I rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe it was a glitch or some condensation on the lens. I zoomed in on the camera feed, but the shape stayed there, motionless. I switched to the thermal camera to get a better look, expecting to see a heat signature, like a person or an animal hiding in the mist. But nothing. The spot where that shape hovered showed absolutely no heat. It was like it wasn't even there. That was the first thing that felt off. I sat back in my chair and kept watching. The fog was thick enough that I couldn't see much with the regular cameras. The shape didn't move or change. It just stayed there, suspended in place. I tried calling the front desk to see if anyone else was around outside, but no one answered. I grabbed my flashlight and decided to go take a look. The building's mostly locked down at night, but I have access to the back door, which leads out toward the parking lot and the tree line. I stepped outside, the fog immediately cold against my skin, and pointed the flashlight toward where I'd seen the shape. The light didn't hit anything solid. I slowly walked closer, hearing only the soft crunch of gravel under my boots and my own breathing. The fog swirled, and for a moment I thought I saw a faint shimmer in the air, like heat waves, but the temperature was definitely dropping, so I wasn't sure what that was. I got to where the cameras showed the shape hovering, but there was nothing there. No footprints, no disturbed gravel, no broken branches. Just fog and empty space. I checked my phone. Signal was weak out here, but managed to snap a photo of the area. When I looked at it after stepping back inside, the image was grainy, but I swore there was a dark outline in the middle of the frame, like something was hiding just beyond the fog. Over the next hour, I kept going back to the window, watching the spot. The shape never came back on the cameras, but sometimes in the corner of my vision, I felt like something was watching me. The silence around the building was heavier than usual, almost like the fog absorbed sound. Around 2 a.m., the motion sensor alarm by the back door went off. I rushed out there with the flashlight, heart pounding, but again found nothing. The fog had thinned a bit by then, and I scanned the lot carefully. No sign of anyone or anything. The rest of my shift passed without incident, but I kept replaying what I'd seen. The thermal camera showing a shape with no heat signature. The silence. The fog acting like a barrier between me and whatever was out there. When my shift ended and I drove home, the streetlights flickered oddly, and my radio kept cutting out for brief seconds, like someone or something was interfering with the signals. I still don't know what I saw that night. Nothing about it makes sense, and the whole thing felt unreal. Like I was looking at something that shouldn't be there, or maybe something that's not supposed to be seen. But I know what I saw. And I know it wasn't just fog or a trick of the light. I was with a few friends out near the edge of town, just past where the streetlights stop and the woods start. We'd driven out there to get away from the city noise, just to hang out and look at the stars, maybe have a couple beers. Nothing fancy, just a chill night out. We found a spot at the end of this gravel road where the trees opened up into a little clearing. It wasn't completely dark. There was still a bit of glow from the town behind us, but the sky was clear and the stars were out in full force. We were spread out on some old camping chairs and blankets, just talking and smoking, when one of my friends, Mike, pointed up and said, "Hey, check that out." At first, I thought he meant a plane or a satellite or something, but then I saw it. These little lights hovering above the treetops, maybe 100 feet up. There were about 8 or 9 of them, all the same size, and they were arranged in a perfect circle. Not random or messy, like you'd expect if they were fireflies or something. It looked like someone had carefully placed them in formation. The weirdest part was how still they were. The circle was drifting slowly to the left, almost gliding, but each light stayed in perfect position relative to the others. No blinking or shifting around, just these tiny pinpricks of white light floating together. No sound at all, no buzzing or humming, just silence. We all just sat there, frozen, watching it move. None of us said much for a while. The whole thing felt unreal, like a weird trick of the eyes or maybe some weird drone light show, but there was no pattern, no colors changing, no noise like drones usually make. After maybe 3 or 4 minutes, the lights started to get dimmer. It was subtle, but they faded evenly, like someone was slowly turning down a dimmer switch. Then, just as smoothly as they appeared, the whole circle blinked out at once. Gone. No flash, no noise, nothing. Just gone. I blinked and looked around at the others. Mike was rubbing his neck like he had a tension headache. Sarah looked pale, staring up at the empty sky like she expected it to come back. I wanted to say something, but I couldn't find the words. We waited for a while after that, just sitting quietly. The woods felt heavier somehow, like the air was thicker, and every little sound, leaves crunching, distant owls, felt too loud. I kept looking back toward where the lights had been, half expecting them to return or for something else to show up. Eventually, we packed up and started driving back. The road back was narrow and twisty, and I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see those lights following us. But nothing. Just the dark trees and the faint glow of the town behind us. I don't really know what we saw that night. None of it made sense, and it wasn't like anything you see in movies or TV shows. No flashing beams, no loud sounds, no bright flashes or weird creatures. Just those quiet lights, perfectly arranged, moving slowly, and then disappearing. Since then, every time I'm out at night near the woods, I get this feeling like something's watching me, just beyond where I can see. Not in a scary way, exactly, more like there's something else there, just waiting. And sometimes when I'm alone, I swear I catch a glimpse of a tiny light out of the corner of my eye, just floating in place. But when I look directly, it's never there. I didn't mean to start watching the security footage so obsessively. It just kind of happened after the first time I noticed something weird. I'd installed the cameras on my house a few years back, mostly for peace of mind, nothing fancy, just the basics. Motion detection, a few angles around the yard, the front door. Usually it was just the occasional raccoon or a cat passing through. But then about a month ago, I started seeing this low, dark shape at the edge of one of the camera's views, always at exactly 3 a.m. At first, I thought it was a glitch or maybe a shadow cast by the streetlight down the road. The shape was always on the far right edge of the frame, just barely visible, almost like it was slipping in and out of view. It didn't move much, just sort of hovered there. I didn't think too much about it until I saw it again the next night. Same time, same place. I pulled up the footage from every night to see if it showed up before, and it did. Every night for about 3 weeks. Always at 3 a.m., always that same vague shape. Sometimes it seemed to stretch out longer, other times it looked shorter, but it never came fully into frame. It was just there. I live alone out here on the edge of town, and while it's quiet, it's not completely deserted. The streetlights and my porch light are the only sources of light at night. The rest is dark trees and grass. I didn't hear anything odd during those nights. No strange noises, no footsteps or voices. What freaked me out most was how precise it was. Like someone had a timer set. The shape didn't wander around or drift off, just stayed low and close to the ground, right at the edge of the camera's sight, for exactly a few minutes. Then it vanished, like someone stepping back into the shadows. I couldn't tell what it was. It wasn't a person. No arms or legs visible. Not an animal either. The way it stayed so still felt unnatural. I wondered if it was some kind of trick of the light or a bug on the lens, but the footage was crystal clear otherwise. One night, I tried to catch it in person. I set my alarm for 2:50 a.m., sat by the window with the curtains pulled back. When 3 came around, I waited and watched that exact spot. Nothing. No shape, no shadow, Nothing. The streetlight lit the area the same as always. The only difference was me waiting there, half dreading what I might see. The next morning, I checked the footage again just to be sure. And there it was. That same dark shape, like it had been there all along, even though I didn't see anything from the window. That was the first time it really got under my skin. How could it be visible on camera, but not to me standing right there? After that, I started sleeping with the blinds closed and the lights on, but the shape kept showing up. Always 3 a.m., always at the same spot. A few nights later, I thought I heard something outside. A low humming noise, very faint, almost like a vibration in the air. It lasted maybe 10 seconds. I froze, listening hard, but when I looked out the window, everything looked normal. No lights, no movement. I couldn't tell if the noise was coming from outside or inside the house. That same night, the security camera caught something else weird. The shape was there again, but this time it seemed to shift slightly forward, almost as if it was leaning or stretching toward the camera for a moment, then pulled back. I watched it frame by frame. I swear it was deliberate. I considered calling someone, the police or a local security company, but there was no threat I could point to. Nothing was stolen, no damage to the property. Just this weird shadowy shape that came out every night, not quite visible, not quite hiding. It felt like it was watching me, or waiting for something. The fact that it showed up when the rest of the neighborhood was dead silent didn't help. The house felt colder at night, even with the heater on. Sometimes I'd catch myself looking toward the window, expecting to see it out there. One morning, I woke up and realized I'd lost about 30 minutes of time. I checked my phone. I'd set an alarm for 6 a.m., but I didn't remember hearing it. My mind was fuzzy, like I'd blanked out or fallen into a weird kind of sleep. I tried to recall what happened right before I fell asleep, but everything was hazy. That day, I spent hours going through the footage again, and I noticed something subtle I'd missed before. Every time the shape appeared, the clock on the video feed would briefly flicker and glitch, like a tiny jump or a skip, just for a second. I don't know if it was a camera glitch or something else, but it felt connected. I started having trouble sleeping. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling like something was just beyond the window. I'd hear soft noises, scratching or rustling, but when I looked, nothing was there. The backyard was empty, but the feeling stayed. One night, I tried putting a flashlight in the yard, aiming it toward where the shape usually showed up. The next morning, the battery was dead. I never saw what drained it, but it happened after the shape appeared. Eventually, I stopped watching the footage all the time. It was messing with my head. But I kept checking the cameras, hoping to catch something different, some clue. Nothing ever changed. The shape came out like clockwork at 3 a.m., stayed low, stayed at the edge of the frame, never fully there, never leaving tracks or signs outside. After a few weeks, the shape disappeared completely. No more glitches, no more strange noises. The nights went back to normal quiet and my sleep got better. I never saw the shape with my own eyes, only on the camera. I can't say what it was or why it came around every night. But for a while, it felt like something was just out there, watching, waiting in the dark, right at the edge of sight. The train stopped about halfway between Leeville and Aldridge, right where the track cuts through that patch of woods. I was in the second car, reading on my phone with my earbuds in, when the lights flickered and we started slowing down. At first I figured it was just a regular delay, happens all the time on that line. But then we came to a full stop and the lights dimmed to that emergency level, just enough to see everyone's faces. A couple people around me took out their earbuds too, looking up. Nobody said anything right away. Then, this guy in a suit up near the front leaned into the aisle and asked if anyone else's phone had just lost service. I checked mine. No bars, no data. I tried toggling airplane mode a few times, but nothing came back. That was weird, but not impossible. That area's always been a dead zone. We sat there for maybe 10 minutes. A few people started getting restless. One guy stood up to see if he could find a conductor, but he came back a minute later and said the doors wouldn't open. He wasn't panicking, just annoyed. Everyone else just kind of shrugged it off. We all thought the train would start up again any second. The fog started rolling in around then. I noticed it out the window. At first it looked normal, patchy, low to the ground, but then it got thick, real thick, fast. Within 5 minutes, you couldn't see more than a few feet past the tracks. It just sort of swallowed everything up. That's when people started pulling their phones again to take pictures, but most of them gave up when the photos came out blank or all washed out. Then the lights cut out completely. Just for a few seconds, but it was long enough to hear everyone shift and murmur. When they came back on, we were still just sitting there, dead quiet outside. Not even birds. You'd expect something, but there was nothing. It was like the fog muffled everything. The first person who saw something was a woman sitting across from me. She was quiet the whole ride, maybe mid-40s, work badge still clipped to her blouse. She leaned forward and tapped on the glass, kind of gently, like she thought someone was out there. I looked over, and she whispered something like, "Do you see them?" I turned to look. At first, I didn't see anything. Then my eyes adjusted. There were shapes in the fog, tall ones, thin, spread out, maybe 6 or 7 of them, just barely visible, like silhouettes but off somehow. I thought it might be trees, but there's no trees that close to the tracks there, and they weren't there before. They didn't move, just stood there, too still and too tall, at least 8 feet, maybe more. Long arms, or what looked like arms, hanging straight down. Someone a few rows behind us gasped, and that started the whispering. You could hear it ripple through the car. People pointing, quietly asking each other if they were seeing the same thing. A guy near the back pulled his phone out and started filming. I remember the red record light blinking. He zoomed in on the window and muttered something like, "What the hell is that?" The figures were still there. No movement, not even a twitch, just lined up, facing the train. One of the kids a few seats up started crying softly. Her mom told her it was okay, that it was just construction workers in the fog, but no one believed that. There were no lights, no vests, no equipment, and the fog was too thick. You couldn't fake those shapes. After a few more minutes, one of the figures, the one closest to us, shifted. It didn't step forward exactly, but it got closer. Like one moment it was 20 feet out, and then it was 10, still not moving, just closer. That's when people really started freaking out. A couple of passengers went to the front door, banging on it, shouting for the conductor. Someone said the intercom wasn't working. No announcements, no explanation. We were locked in, just stuck. A woman stood up and tried to open the emergency exit, but it wouldn't budge. She said it was jammed. A man in the front car tried pulling down the window, and that didn't work either. Everything was unresponsive, like the whole train had shut down. We were just sitting in a tube, sealed up tight with those things outside. I looked back out the window. The one that had moved was gone. The others were still there, still watching. A guy next to me whispered, "Where'd it go?" No one answered. Then the lights flickered again and came back up brighter, normal bright, and the train lurched forward. Just like that. Like nothing had happened. We rolled slowly at first, then picked up speed, and the fog thinned almost immediately. Within 2 minutes, we were pulling into Aldridge Station like everything was fine. People poured out onto the platform. Everyone was talking, some quietly, some loud and nervous. The conductor was already out of his booth, walking up and down like he didn't know what the hell had happened. He kept saying there'd been a systems glitch, that we'd lost power briefly, but everything was okay now. Someone asked about the fog and the shapes. I think it was the guy who filmed. The conductor looked at him like he was nuts. He said he hadn't seen anything. A few of us stayed behind and asked if we could talk to someone official. I don't know what we expected. Eventually, a transit cop came by and said they'd review the cameras and log the event, but there was no danger, no injuries, so we should go on our way. The next day, someone who'd been on the train posted screenshots from the CCTV feed. They'd gotten them through a friend who worked in the control room or something. The weird thing was, you could see all of us in the car, pointing at the windows, reacting. But outside, nothing. Just the fog. No figures, no shapes, not even shadows. There were 4 different angles, and in every one, it looked like we were losing our minds over empty air. The guy who filmed with his phone posted his video too. Same thing. He was aiming right at them, talking about what he saw, but the footage was just blank white fog. I don't take that line much anymore. If I have to go that way, I drive. Just seems easier. Safer, somehow. I asked around a bit, tried to find the woman who first pointed them out, or the guy in the suit who lost service. Nobody seemed to know who they were. I'm not even sure they got off at Aldridge with the rest of us. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if the train hadn't started back up. If we'd stayed there, with the fog closing in, and whatever those things were waiting just past it. Waiting for what? I don't know. I didn't even check the camera right away. That was the weird part. I'd set it up mostly out of habit. I've got 5 trail cams around my property, some for deer, some just because I like knowing what's out there. We've got coyotes, the occasional bear, nothing unusual. I live alone just outside of Winchester, Virginia. Couple wooded acres, not remote, but quiet enough. My nearest neighbor's about half a mile off. I set the camera on the backside of the woods near an old game trail that cuts past a fallen oak. It doesn't get much traffic anymore. I hadn't pulled the card for a few weeks. It was February, cold, and I wasn't expecting much movement. That night I'd been inside watching a movie when the power flickered. Not long, maybe a second or two, just enough to kick off the TV and reset the router. I looked out the kitchen window and noticed something odd. Just a glow through the trees. Not moving, not flickering like a fire. Just this pale light, like someone had set up a lantern in the woods. It didn't make sense. I walked out to the back deck, and the light was gone. No sound, no wind. Dead still out there. It was around 2 a.m., and the snow was fresh, maybe an inch that fell earlier that evening. I figured maybe headlights had bounced weird off the trees or something. Nothing else seemed off. I didn't think about it again until Sunday afternoon. I was clearing out old footage from the trail cams and got to the one by the fallen oak. There was a motion clip time-stamped the night the power had flickered, 2:03 a.m. At first it looked like nothing, just the trees, the snow, some faint branches swaying. Then this shape drifted across the frame. I don't know what else to call it. It wasn't an animal, wasn't a person. It didn't walk or run or fly, it just moved through. It wasn't solid. That was the part that made my skin crawl. It gave off light, very soft white-blue light, but it didn't have any edges. It looked like a stretched balloon underwater, flickering slightly, like heat above falling. The trees lit up as it passed. Not just a camera artifact, it was clearly casting light. You could see the shadows move on the trunks, the snow glowing under it. It passed through the center of the frame in less than 2 seconds, then gone. I replayed it probably a dozen times, slowed it down. There was no sound on the camera, but I strained to hear anyway, like maybe I'd missed something. It didn't touch anything, didn't disturb snow, just moved in a straight line from the left side to the right and vanished into the woods. What struck me was the direction. It had been moving toward my house. That was the last clip recorded that night. The camera didn't pick up anything else until 2 days later. A squirrel in daylight. I left the footage alone for a bit, didn't even mention it to anyone. It just unsettled me, more than I expected. A few nights later, I was out in the shed and heard something odd. Not a noise exactly, more like a pressure shift. Like when you're driving and the air changes in a tunnel. It lasted a few seconds. I stepped outside to listen, and the woods were completely silent. No wind, no owls, not even the usual creaks from the trees, just silent and still. I walked around to where the camera had picked up that shape. Nothing looked different. Same logs, same patchy snow. I stood there for a while, then went back in. I didn't sleep much that night. The next evening, I checked the camera again. Another clip had been recorded. This one was weirder, if that's possible. Same time, just after 2 a.m., same faint motion alert. But when I watched it, there was nothing there. No animals, no branches moving. But the trees lit up again. Same angle, same pale light sweeping across from left to right. But this time the source wasn't visible. Just the light. Like something was moving behind the camera and shining forward, but the shape never entered the frame. The trees cast long shadows toward the lens as if something bright had passed close behind. But the camera's motion sensor still triggered. That made my stomach turn a bit. The thing, whatever it was, had passed behind the camera this time. Closer to the house, I went out the next day to inspect it. There were no footprints. Snow had fallen again the night before, just a light dusting, but not enough to cover tracks completely, and nothing else had set off the camera. The battery was full, the lens was clean. That night, I stayed up, made coffee, sat by the back window with the lights off. I kept checking the trees for any movement, any glow. But nothing happened. Around 2:10, I did hear a very faint crackling sound, like twigs snapping under something light, but it only lasted a few seconds. I opened the back door and stepped onto the deck. Again, no wind, no movement. Just cold air and a faint metallic smell, like rain on old wiring. I didn't go far, just stood there listening until I couldn't feel my fingers. Then I went back inside. The next morning, the trail camera was off. I figured maybe the batteries finally died, but when I took it inside and opened the panel, they were fine. Full charge. The card was still inside. I turned it back on and it worked immediately. But there were no new clips. I replaced the batteries anyway and set it back up. That night, nothing. The next night, nothing. Then 3 days later, a new video appeared. Same time, 2:03 a.m. This one had sound. I didn't think the camera even had audio. It was cheap, an older model, but this clip had faint background noise. Not much, but enough to catch something strange. A kind of low-frequency hum, barely above a whisper, like someone humming a single note under their breath. It got louder as the clip progressed. The video itself showed the same light sweeping through the trees, but again, no shape, just illumination moving from left to right. The hum peaked right as the light faded, then silence again. I brought the clip into editing software to clean it up, boost the sound. There was nothing under the hum, no animal sounds, no wind, just that steady, low tone. I checked other clips from the same day, no sound on those, not even a hint. I haven't caught anything new since then. It's been over a month. The snow's melted. I still check the camera every few days. It works. Records squirrels, raccoons, the occasional deer, but no lights, no hum, no shapes. The woods seem normal again, but I've stopped going out there after dark. I work the overnight shift at a gas station on the edge of town. It's the kind of place that mostly sees the same few late-night travelers or local workers grabbing a quick snack or gas. Usually nights drag, but every once in a while, something happens that messes with your head for a while. One night, around 2:30 a.m., I was restocking the cooler by the back of the store when I glanced out the big front window. The sky was clear, and I caught something strange moving just above the horizon. It looked like a bright streak of light, maybe a shooting star or a plane, but it didn't behave like either. The light streaked across the sky quickly, then suddenly stopped midair. It just hung there, paused like someone had hit pause on a video. Then, just as suddenly, it darted backward the way it came, only faster, disappearing behind the trees. I blinked and rubbed my eyes. The whole thing only lasted about 5 seconds. There was no sound, no hum, no crackle, nothing. I was sure I would have heard a plane or something moving that fast overhead, but the gas station was dead silent except for the old refrigerator humming. Curious, I went over to the security cameras mounted outside, which cover the parking lot and a bit of the sky. The footage showed the same thing, a blurry white streak crossing the sky, freezing in place, then zooming back the other way. The object was just a bright, fuzzy shape. No wings or tail, no blinking lights like an airplane, nothing that looked familiar. I showed the clip to my coworker when she came in for the next shift, but she just shrugged. She said she never heard or saw anything while she was on. Nobody else mentioned anything weird that night. The next day, I asked a few regulars if they'd noticed anything strange, but no one had. The local news was quiet, no reports of meteor showers or planes. It was like the whole thing had happened only in my head, except the security footage was real. I kept thinking about the silence. Normally, with something moving that fast in the sky, especially close enough to see clearly, you'd hear at least a faint noise. But that night, there was nothing. Not even a gust of wind or a rustling tree. Over the next few days, I rewatched the footage a bunch of times. Each time I looked, I noticed little things I hadn't before, like the way the object's edges shimmered, almost like heat waves, but it was cold outside. Or how the light seemed to flicker, like it wasn't steady but pulsing softly. One night after my shift, I went outside and looked up, hoping to catch whatever it was again. The sky was empty except for stars, and it felt normal, quiet. But I kept thinking about that frozen streak in the sky and how it vanished without a trace. I haven't seen anything like it since. Sometimes I wonder if anyone else ever caught a glimpse or if I was just the only one awake to notice. The footage stays saved on my phone, but it doesn't explain anything. Just a blurry light, moving weird, silent, and gone. The power went out just like that. 1 minute everything was normal, then the streetlights blinked off and I was standing in the dark. I was up on the rooftop of my building, mostly just killing time, watching the quiet neighborhood below. It wasn't a big city or anything, just a bunch of houses lined up along a couple of streets. I had a pretty clear view of the block down the road, and that's when I noticed the blackout starting. It was weird, because the power outage wasn't random. It was moving block by block, almost like someone was flipping switches one after the other. The first block went dark, then the second, then the third, all in a straight line down the street. You could see the blackout creeping forward like a slow shadow, swallowing each set of streetlights and windows as it moved. The houses behind me still had lights on, but every few seconds, one more block went pitch black. I figured maybe some kind of maintenance or a blown transformer, but the way it moved was too precise, too deliberate. It wasn't flickering or buzzing, just perfectly dark where it passed. I pulled out my phone to check if there was any news, but the screen went dark too, like it was dead, even though it was fully charged just minutes before. That's when I saw it. Just ahead of the blackout, floating over the empty street, was something metallic. I don't mean like a car or a drone, but a smooth, shiny shape that didn't look quite right. It was low, maybe 20 or 30 feet off the ground, and it moved silently, gliding forward ahead of the darkness like it was leading it. The shape was long and curved, almost like a wing or a blade, but without any sharp edges. It caught what little light there was from the moon and reflected it back, like a dull mirror. There was no sound, no hum, no buzz, no engine noise, nothing. At first, I thought it might be a drone, but I've seen plenty of drones before, and this was different. It didn't have lights or propellers, didn't flicker or pulse. It moved smoothly and steadily, as if it was floating on air. The way it cut through the sky made everything around it feel off, like something was wrong with the space it occupied. I tried to focus, but after a few seconds, I noticed the blackout had reached the block right behind it. The lights there blinked out one by one, and the street went totally dark. The metallic shape paused for a moment, just hovering there, then glided forward again, keeping a steady distance ahead of the darkness, like it was herding it or controlling it somehow. I couldn't stop watching, even though my stomach was twisting with unease. It felt like the whole street was holding its breath. I kept glancing back toward my building. The power was still on there, but it wouldn't last. The blackout was creeping closer, slower now, but definitely coming. Then the shape tilted, almost like it noticed me up on the roof. It didn't speed up or try to hide, just shifted slightly, reflecting the moonlight in a way that made it hard to look at directly. I felt my skin crawl and stepped back toward the ladder that led down. My phone still wouldn't turn on, and the streetlights on my block flickered once, then stayed lit. The metallic thing moved again, heading forward toward the next block, and the lights there went out as it passed. The blackout was swallowing the town one block at a time. Perfectly linear, perfectly silent, except for the faint creaks and groans of houses settling in the cold night air. I started climbing down the ladder, heart pounding. From the street, everything looked normal, except for the darkness eating away the blocks down the road. No sirens, no people yelling or rushing around, just the quiet crawl of the blackout. I got back inside and looked out the window. The streetlights on my block still worked, but the block across the way was dark. And in the sky, I swear I caught a glimpse of something metallic, moving just ahead of the darkness again. Smooth, silent, and impossibly still. I checked my phone one last time. Dead. Not a single bar. I didn't sleep that night. Kept looking out the window every few minutes, but the shape didn't show itself again. The blackout didn't reach my block. Not that night, at least. By morning, the power was back on everywhere. I still don't know what I saw or why the blackout moved like that, but it's the only time I've ever felt like something was watching us, moving through the town like it owned the night. We were cruising at 38,000 feet, somewhere over Nevada. I don't remember the exact time, but it was dark out, probably around 2 a.m. The weather was smooth. No turbulence, no clouds, just stars above and the soft glow of cities way below. One of those long, quiet overnight stretches where the autopilot does most of the work and you're just monitoring gauges, chatting lightly, sipping lukewarm coffee. There were two of us up front, me and my first officer, Dan. Good guy, ex-military, sharp. We were flying a standard passenger jet, about 3/4 full. The cabin was dark and quiet. I just finished checking in with ATC and was flipping through the weather radar when Dan leaned forward, squinting out the left side of the cockpit. "You see that?" he asked. I looked where he was pointing, low and a little ahead of our nose, maybe 10 degrees off center. At first I didn't notice anything, but then I caught a movement. A light. White and steady, not blinking like a commercial aircraft beacon. It was far off, too far to judge speed or altitude, but it stood out, especially that high up where there shouldn't be much else flying. We watched it in silence for a minute. It wasn't getting closer, just kind of holding position. I radioed ATC, asked if they had any traffic in our vicinity at that altitude. "Negative," they said. "Only known traffic is you. Radar is clear at your altitude and above." Dan and I looked at each other. That was the first point where something felt off. Civilian aircraft don't operate that high, especially not in the middle of the night with no transponder, no clearance, and no lights other than a single white glow. About 30 seconds after that call, the light moved. It didn't bank, didn't arc, it just slid sideways, smooth, like it was gliding on glass. It kept its distance, but moved from the left side of our nose across to the right, then stopped again. I've been flying for 20 years. I've never seen anything maneuver like that. No tilt, no drift, just a perfect lateral motion. "Could be military," Dan said quietly, but he didn't sound convinced. I tried hailing it on guard frequency, just in case. "Aircraft at my 11 o'clock, this is November," etc. No reply. Tried again, nothing. The object started matching our movements after that. I nudged the yoke gently to the left, just a few degrees. The light mirrored us, same direction, same speed, held formation for maybe a minute. I leveled out, so did it. I dipped down slightly, just enough to lose a couple 100 feet. The light mirrored that too, perfectly, precisely, like it was tethered to us by an invisible line. That's when my stomach started to knot. I don't scare easy up there. You learn to stay calm, troubleshoot, run checklists, but this thing wasn't behaving like anything normal. No strobes, no heat signature on our IR sensors. It wasn't triggering any TCAS alerts. Nothing. We kept watching it, mostly in silence. I think both of us were trying not to say what we were thinking. It stayed with us like that for almost 10 minutes. Never got closer than a couple miles, never drifted off, just matched speed and direction, responding to every tiny adjustment we made. Like it was studying us, or waiting for something. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it shot straight up. No arc, no trail, no sound, just an instant vertical climb, faster than anything I've ever seen. 1 second it was there. The next, it was a pinpoint above us. Then nothing. Just empty sky and stars again. I checked the radar, still clear. I asked ATC if they had anything above 60,000 feet. They said no. Nothing on any scope, no military exercises planned in that corridor. They asked if I wanted to file a report. I said no. At the time, I just wanted to finish the route, land the plane, and put it out of my head. Dan didn't say much the rest of the flight. Neither did I. We both wrote notes afterward. Just in case. Personal records. We didn't log it officially. We knew how that would go. They'd chalk it up to fatigue, atmospheric distortion, a weather balloon, whatever. I've flown that route a dozen times since. Never saw it again. Never saw anything like it. I was working the night shift at this remote communications outpost out in the middle of nowhere, way up in the mountains where there's barely any light pollution. My job was mostly maintenance, checking signal equipment, and just keeping an eye on the place overnight. Usually it was pretty boring, but sometimes the isolation gets to you. That night, I stepped outside around midnight to take a break. The sky was clear and full of stars. At least that's what I thought at first. I looked up, just standing there with my coffee, when I noticed something odd. The stars weren't steady. They started to move, slowly at first, like the whole sky was spinning. I blinked, thinking maybe my eyes were messing with me, or I was just tired. I stared longer, trying to focus, and the movement kept going. The stars were rotating around some invisible center, and it was weirdly hypnotic. I pulled out my phone to check the time and maybe take a picture, but the screen's light suddenly felt too bright compared to the dark sky. That's when I realized it wasn't the stars moving at all. Something massive was slowly shifting in front of the sky. I couldn't see the edges clearly. It was just this enormous dark shape blotting out the stars as it moved. No lights, no noise. It wasn't like a plane or a satellite or anything I'd ever seen. I stood frozen, watching it glide silently overhead, covering more and more of the sky. The way it moved didn't feel natural either. It was smooth but deliberate, like it was aware it was being seen. I tried to call out, but my voice caught in my throat. The wind picked up, but there was no sound coming from the shape itself. I kept looking around, half expecting to see some lights from a nearby town or other workers coming out, but I was alone. The outpost was a few miles away from anything else, so no one could have missed this. As the shape passed over, the stars behind it vanished. For a moment, the sky was just an empty blackness with no stars at all, and it felt like the air got heavier, like something was pressing down. I could see my breath, and my hands started shaking. I tried to pull out my phone again, but the screen stayed blank, like the shape was blocking any signal or electronic interference. I put the phone away, not sure if it was worth trying to record something that probably wouldn't save properly anyway. It passed overhead, moving slowly, and then, just as quietly as it came, it drifted away, letting the stars come back into view. The spinning stopped, and the sky looked normal again. But I knew it wasn't normal. I went back inside and checked the security cameras around the outpost, hoping to see the shape on one of them, but the feeds all looked fine. No shadows, no moving dark shapes, just the usual empty landscape under the starry sky. I stayed inside the rest of the night, watching the sky through the window. Nothing else happened. When my shift ended, I packed up and left without saying much. I didn't know how to explain what I'd seen without sounding crazy. Even now, I'm not sure what it was. It wasn't an airplane or a drone. It didn't make a sound. The stars didn't move themselves. Something huge just drifted overhead, blocking the sky, and then vanished. I haven't gone back to that outpost since. I used to spend a lot of late nights in my garage messing with radios. I've been into shortwave since high school, just something about scanning around and catching weird stations from halfway across the world. I'm not licensed or anything serious like that, just one of those guys with a shelf full of gear and a beat-up antenna strapped to the roof. This happened last November, around 2 in the morning. My wife was already asleep upstairs, and I'd come out to the garage to tinker around, mostly just flipping through bands out of boredom. It was one of those dry, windless nights where everything feels kind of muted. No wind, no bugs, just that soft hum from the street lamp outside and the occasional creak from the water heater. I had my Grundig set up with the loop antenna plugged in, just slowly sweeping the bands like I always did. A lot of static, occasional snippets of weird foreign broadcasts, the usual. I wasn't expecting to pick up anything interesting. Most of the traffic that time of night is just garbage. Then I landed on something around 9.4 megahertz that wasn't quite right. It started as this low, steady pulse, like a metronome, but duller. It didn't sound natural. No voice, no modulation, just this dry, electronic tick, about one every second. I listened for a bit, figured maybe it was just one of those utility stations or a test tone from a military frequency. But then it changed. The tick doubled in speed, then tripled, then dropped back down. I didn't touch anything. The frequency stayed locked, but it started forming a pattern. 3 fast ticks, pause, 1 long tick, pause, then 5 short ones in a row. Then it repeated. I grabbed a notebook and started jotting it down. I do that sometimes when I catch odd transmissions, just for fun, really. But this one kept going exactly the same, over and over. 3 short, 1 long, 5 short. then pause, then again, like clockwork. I listened to that loop maybe 20 times thinking it might be Morse, but it didn't line up. I mean, maybe loosely, but it didn't translate into anything. It wasn't a message, at least not in any format I recognized, but it felt deliberate, if that makes sense, like someone or something was trying to draw attention without actually saying anything. After about 10 minutes of that, I decided to record it. I had my little digital recorder I usually use for samples. I hooked it up, hit record, and switched back to the frequency. Silence. Not static. Just nothing. Like the signal had been yanked. I thought maybe I bumped the antenna or a cable came loose, but everything looked fine. I tuned a little up and down the band, thinking maybe it shifted, but it was just dead air. The whole section of the spectrum felt empty. Not even the usual fuzz. I unplugged the recorder, switched everything back to how it was before, and suddenly the static came back. Not the signal, that was gone, but the general background noise. I sat there for maybe 20 minutes, scanning up and down to find it again. Nothing. I left the radio on while I got up to stretch. The garage felt weird, colder than it had a minute ago. Not freezing, but off. Like how a room feels after someone's just walked through it. I opened the side door and stepped out onto the driveway to get some air. Everything was quiet. I live at the edge of a neighborhood cul-de-sac. Not out in the sticks, but not dense suburban either. We've got a few motion sensor lights, and they were all dark. No wind, no cars, just dead still. When I turned to go back in, I noticed the porch light flicker once, then stay off. Figured it was a loose bulb. I walked in, flipped the switch off, and back on. Nothing. The breaker was fine. All the other lights in the garage were still working. I went back to the desk, powered the radio off, then on again. Ran through the usual bands. It was like someone had wiped the whole slice of air clean. I don't know how else to say it. You get used to a certain level of clutter on shortwave, interference, buzz, drift. But this was silent, like someone turned off the world behind the static. About an hour later, I gave up and went inside. Checked the clock on the oven, 3:13. My watch said 3:24. I remember squinting at it, trying to remember if I'd set it wrong or if the power had gone out, but everything else in the kitchen was on time. I woke up later that morning feeling wired and kind of off. Like I hadn't really slept, even though I'd been out for hours. The first thing I did was check the recorder. There was a file on it. 12 seconds of me plugging in the cable. Then silence. Not even hiss. That whole day, I kept thinking about that pattern. 3 fast, 1 long, 5 fast. I caught myself writing it down again at work, like it was stuck in my head. I ran it through some online Morse decoders, tried treating it like binary, looked up numbers stations archives, nothing matched. It didn't exist, at least not anywhere I could find. The next night, I went back out, tried to replicate the setup exactly. Same frequency, same antenna, same gear. Nothing. I even left the recorder running for an hour just in case. Picked up a couple weird bleeps from South America and what might have been Russian naval traffic, but not that pulse. I tried for a week straight. Same time, same band. It never came back. But here's the part that really stuck with me. A few nights later, around the same time, 2:15 or so, I was out back letting the dog out. It was cold and clear. I looked up, just kind of zoning out, and I saw what looked like a satellite, one of those steady, slow-moving dots crossing the sky. Except this one stopped, right above the house, dead stop. No wobble, no drift, just hung there for maybe 10 seconds. Then it blinked once and faded out. I didn't tell my wife about any of it, just said I was having issues with the radio and left it at that. I packed up most of my gear the next day. Still have it, just haven't touched it since. Not sure why. Nothing really happened, but it's like something opened for a second then shut again. And I was just close enough to know I wasn't supposed to be there. I've been hiking alone for years. It's my thing, really. The quiet of the woods, the solitude of a long trek, far from the noise of city life, nothing beats it. That's what made me take the trip to the park that day. It wasn't my first time there, and I was looking forward to a long, peaceful walk along the river trail. But I can't explain it. Something felt different about that day. The weather had been odd that morning. There was a strange stillness in the air. But I didn't think much of it. It wasn't until I was well into my hike, just past the old trail markers, that the feeling started to settle in. It wasn't just the air, it was the whole place. The trees seemed quieter than usual. Even the river seemed to be running slower, almost as if the forest itself was holding its breath. I had been walking for a few hours when I reached a part of the trail I hadn't seen before. The path veered down to a small, secluded part of the riverbank where the trees crowded in closer and everything felt a little more enclosed. The water was clear, the kind of clear you don't see in many places. It was a spot I would have passed by without thinking, but something drew me closer. Maybe it was the perfect spot to sit down and rest for a while. I'd barely taken a few steps toward the river when I noticed something strange. There was a figure sitting at the water's edge, just ahead of me. At first, I thought it was someone else, another hiker, maybe someone who had taken the same trail, but the closer I got, the more I realized how wrong I was. This person wasn't human. It was sitting still, almost like it was waiting for something, just watching the river. At first, I couldn't make out any details. It was like a silhouette blurred by the trees and the shadows. But as I got closer, everything about it started to become clearer. It wasn't like anything I had ever seen. The figure was tall, though not in a way that felt unnatural. Its posture was rigid but calm. It was sitting cross-legged by the riverbank, staring at the water in front of it. I couldn't see its face clearly, but there was something about it that made the hairs on my neck stand up. The way the figure was dressed, or rather how its body seemed to be covered, wasn't fabric or any material I could recognize. It shimmered, like the light was bending around it. It almost looked like the figure was part of the landscape itself, blending in with the surroundings. I stopped dead in my tracks. For a moment, I thought about turning around and heading back down the trail, but my legs wouldn't move. I just stood there, staring at it. I knew it was wrong to stare, but I couldn't look away. My mind raced, wondering what I was looking at, but a strange calmness washed over me, almost like I was being hypnotized by the stillness of the scene. And then it did something. The figure, this thing, moved its head. Not like it had just noticed me, but more like it was acknowledging my presence. I froze, my heart racing in my chest. The air felt thick, heavy, like I was holding my breath without realizing it. That's when it happened. The thing, it spoke to me. Not with words, not out loud, but in my mind. A presence, an understanding. It was like it had been waiting for me to approach, like it knew I was coming. I could hear its thoughts, or at least I could feel them. They weren't human thoughts, but somehow they felt familiar, like the way you can just tell when someone is staring at you, even if you can't see them. It didn't speak in any language I could understand, but it didn't need to. The message was simple and unmistakable. Something is coming. I stood there, utterly still, as the sense of urgency washed over me. The figure didn't move, but the message grew stronger in my mind. It wasn't a warning in the way we usually think of warnings. There wasn't any fear in it, no panic. It wasn't threatening. It was just a fact, a statement, like telling someone it's going to rain. And then, without another movement, the figure turned its gaze back to the river. I didn't know what to do, what to say, or even how to feel. Part of me wanted to ask what it meant, but I knew I wasn't supposed to. I wasn't supposed to speak. I just had to understand what it had told me. Before I could take another step, it happened again. Only this time, I didn't hear it in my mind. I felt it. The ground beneath me trembled, just slightly, like something far off was shifting. The air grew thick again, this time colder, heavier. It felt like the world was holding its breath, just like the forest had been earlier that morning. The figure's presence faded, and I felt a strange pull in my chest. It wasn't physical, but it felt like I was being gently tugged, like the earth itself was trying to get my attention. The figure was still there, but I knew it was time to leave. Something was coming. I turned and walked away from the riverbank, but I didn't want to take my eyes off the creature. I couldn't explain it, but I knew it wasn't a being from this world. It wasn't human. It wasn't like anything I'd ever read about, not in science fiction or in the folklore I had learned over the years. But I also knew that it wasn't dangerous. It didn't want to hurt me. It had only wanted to share its warning, and now that it had, it was done. As I walked back down the trail, my mind was racing. What had it meant? What was coming? I didn't know, but there was a quiet certainty that I couldn't shake. There was no urgency in its words, no panic, but the message was unmistakable. Something was coming. When I finally made it back to the main trail, I looked over my shoulder, half expecting to see the figure still sitting there, but it was gone. The forest was calm again, the air lighter. It was like nothing had ever happened. But I knew something was wrong. I didn't know how I knew, but I knew. I don't know if anyone else would have believed me if I'd told them about it. I don't know if anyone would have understood. But that night I couldn't sleep. The message kept echoing in my mind. Something was coming. The next day I found out. The local news reported it. A landslide in the nearby mountains. A massive one. A whole section of the trail had been wiped out. The damage was extensive. No one was hurt, thank God. But the destruction was worse than anything anyone had anticipated. I don't know if the creature was warning me about the landslide or if it was something else entirely. I'm not sure what it meant when it said, something is coming, but I don't think it was just about the landslide. It didn't feel like just an ordinary disaster. I haven't been back to that trail since. I don't think I'll go back. Maybe I was meant to see that creature. Maybe I wasn't. But I'll never forget the look in its eyes or the message it gave me. Something was coming. And whatever it was, I wasn't ready for it.